Oh, good morning. Good morning to everybody out there. Welcome to Status Coup. Let me fix my sleeves here. This is Placone reporting for Status Coup, and we are going to cover the live hearing of Gigi Sohn. This is the third hearing, and it's already been postponed by an hour. As many of you probably already realize, Gigi Sohn is Biden's nominee to the FCC. We have been waiting about 2 years for this to happen. Why is this so important? Well, because a free and open internet is at stake here, folks. Gigi Sohn would give the FCC a 3-2 pro net neutrality majority, something Joe Biden promised, and they made Joe Biden promise it. The only reason she's the nominee is because in the Bernie Biden task force, the Bernie camp made the Biden camp promise to pick a pro net neutrality FCC appointee. And by the way, smash that like button. Smash that like button. We're about 45 minutes later than we should have been because they randomly just decided to make the hearing an hour later. I don't know when they actually announced it. We had to figure it out online. And we figured it out. Okay, they pushed it back an hour. Which, you know who really appreciates that? People on the West Coast who set their alarm for this. That's who really, oh, it's an hour later. Great. Good. Glad I know that. That's fantastic. That's great. And by the way, welcome. It is Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day. And I'm glad that we could have the most romantic event ever for you to kick off your Valentine's Day. My wife left for work recently, and she was really torn up. She's like, baby, I can't believe that I'm missing the most romantic event of the year. You mean the FCC hearing? And she goes, yes. I'm like, I know. It is such. I know there's probably a lot of couples out there. I mean, you hear about this all the time. I mean, a lot of people like, hey, our marriage was in trouble. And then an FCC hearing really just reinvigorated our spark. You know, I mean, it really just made us realize how much we love each other. And I said, baby, I love you the way society loves a free and open internet. And we looked into each other's eyes. That was one of my earlier dates with my wife was we watched the confirmation of Ajit Pai. We watched it in a very sad way. And it was very painful. And we were like, well, we might not have a free and open internet much longer, but at least we have each other. That's not true. My wife and I did not watch that hearing together. But you know what? This is true. One time on my birthday, we were driving to the event. Actually, my wife took me to a trampoline park for my birthday. It was a really cool birthday, actually. And on the way to the trampoline park, in between dinner and the trampoline park, we were listening to NPR, and they did a segment on net neutrality. And in their typical nice, polite Republican fashion, the two people they had discussing net neutrality was an industry lobbyist. And who was the second person, you ask? An industry lobbyist. So very broad range of perspectives going on. The pro-industry perspective and the pro-industry perspective, but going to shine a light on some other perspectives, sort of. That was the discussion. So I was yelling at the radio within 2 minutes, and my wife was like, you know what? It's your birthday. We're going to turn this off now. And I said, that's fair. But anyway, this is, the most romantic event you could possibly ask for. Let me know in the chat. What are you doing for Valentine's Day? Do you got an exciting one? Please do leave a super chat if you are able. We will get to all of them. The hearing starts in about 8 minutes here. And look, guys, this is infinitely important. Once we have a pro net neutrality FCC, one, we can reinstate net neutrality at the federal level. Two, the FCC really wants to act on broadband justice. What does that mean? Well, it means that they're going to hold internet service providers more accountable for the types of broadband they're offering people and the quality of it. They're going to address environmental racism when it comes to broadband deployment. They're going to look into more diverse media ownership. And of course, the big one, they're going to reinstate net neutrality at a federal level. Look, net neutrality, to stay on the romance topic, look, for as long as the internet has been around, we, the people, have had, I would argue, a love story with the free and open internet. We really love it. It has enriched our lives. But you know what? It's not a relationship you can take for granted. You still got to work on the romance. Sometimes you got to buy the free and open internet flowers. Sometimes you got to buy roses. Sometimes you got to buy candies. Sometimes you got to tell the free and open internet that you really appreciate what it does each day. And I feel like as a society, maybe we just kind of take it for granted. It'll always be here. Well, I got bad news. It might not always be there, because we don't have net neutrality at the federal level anymore. We've had it since the advent of the internet. It was an assumed rule since the invention of the internet. But then a bunch of cable companies decided we don't want to follow this rule because we can make more money if we don't treat internet traffic equally. And so they sued, and they won that lawsuit. They said, yeah, these companies don't have to follow net neutrality. But then what happened after? Well, there was a bunch of public outcry. So Tom Wheeler, during the Obama administration, had to make net neutrality official and make it an official federal law by making the internet a utility in our lives, which is what it is. But then Ajit Pai, who, by the way, did start with Obama, but then was made head by Donald Trump, Ajit Pai unrolled net neutrality. That was the first thing he did. But the good news after that, a bunch of people rallied, and the court granted permission that you could have net neutrality laws on a state level. So a bunch of states passed their own net neutrality laws, my state of California being one of them. So we don't have we haven't seen the effects of a post net neutrality world yet. And hopefully we never do. But we can only hold the line for so long, folks. We can only do that for so long. And this is a crucial step in getting a free and open internet back. Now, what exactly does net neutrality do? Net neutrality assures that the internet flows free and open. It flows like flowing water. Whether you go to Status Coup's website or the White House website, it loads exactly the same. No content can be discriminated against or prioritized. You also can't put people into fast lanes and slow lanes. You have to give them the internet that they paid for. Net neutrality assures all this. In a post-net neutrality world, the internet could look a lot like cable television 2.0, meaning places like Fox News, CNN, they'll pay the fees so their stuff will load fast, and stuff like this will go the way of the buffalo. We already compete with enough, folks. If our streams don't load, if our podcasts don't load, we're really screwed. We are really, really screwed. And that's what a post-net neutrality world would look like. It would look like where corporate content loads quick as can be, and other types of content that can't afford whatever fee structure they come up with, it'll be like dial-up. It'll be what some of you might need to Google what dial-up is. It's really slow. It's really frickin' slow. And that's what's at stake here. So this is actually a huge deal. And for people who think, well, that'll never happen, they never thought what would happen with radio would happen. Radio used to be like this local medium, and there were all kinds of local personalities on the radio because it made sense. That's what the medium's meant for. They never thought that would change. When the Telecommunications Act happened, nobody was paying attention. The Telecommunications Act in 1996 completely homogenized radio, and radio was gobbled up by a handful of companies. No one ever thought something like that would happen. So no one was paying attention when it did happen. And then you know what happened? Everybody lost their frickin' job. Everyone lost their job. Radio was completely homogenized, and now it's the medium we know it as now. There used to be way more local ownership in television. And guess what happened? They homogenized that too. No one thought that would happen, but it did. And guess what? I know it's hard to wrap one's head around this, but at the end of the day, the internet is still just another medium. It's more technologically advanced, sure, but it's still just another medium. And if you think they can't take it from us, you're mistaken. They frickin' can. And this is why issues like this are infinitely important. Smash that like button. Smash it. We had the thing up a second ago. Bring it back up, call it. Smash it. Smash the like button. There it is. Yeah. Smash that like. I'm going to take a sip of coffee, and that's going to give you guys time to smash the like button. You guys ready? Here we go. Did you smash it? That was enough time. Did everybody smash it? I'm not sure. I'm not convinced everybody smashed it. So I'm going to take one more sip of coffee, and I would appreciate it very, very much if you would smash that like button. And by the way, super chats are very, very welcome and appreciated as well. Helps keep this show on the air. Did you smash it? Did you smash that like button? Did we get a smash? I hope we did. So 1 minute and counting, they're going to start the hearing. Now, keep in mind, this is the third hearing for Gigi Sohn. And the reason they've been delaying confirming her is because for all the reasons I just mentioned, they don't want all the things that a pro-net neutrality FCC is looking to do. They don't want that to happen. So they started a big right-wing smear campaign against her. We've been covering this on Status Coup. I've been covering it on my show, Get Your News On with Ron. And also, Biden's kind of indifferent to this. He doesn't really care. This is a concession he had to make. And also, Chuck Schumer over in the Senate has a million conflicts of interest with big tech. So there's a bunch of reasons why they have drawn this out for 2 years. 2 years and an hour. And an hour. This was supposed to already be in session. They've delayed it by an hour. It's unreal. That was just one final FU to every digital rights advocate in the country. There's like, here's one final FU. We're going to push it back an hour just to mess with you. And this is the third hearing. Hopefully this time they're through with the BS. And I feel like they've got to be. Because here's the deal. They re-up Gigi Sohn's nomination. I'm keeping an eye over on the website to see when it officially begins. And it should start any minute here now. And it looks like it hasn't quite kicked off quite yet. And for everybody on the West Coast, good morning. Thanks for waking up early with me. I set my alarm only to find out, well, I could have slept in another 40 minutes. But what are you going to do? Since we're waiting for it to kick in, I will mention, guys, I got some tour dates. You can get some tickets now. Placone.com. The first show, by the way, in Los Angeles was a blast, and the tradition has continued. I have had Status Coup people at every show so far, every headlining show at least. I mean, sometimes I do sets around town. I don't really announce those. But every headlining show has had Status Coup people. Let's keep that up. My next one, April 14th, the second show in Los Angeles. First one was a blast. Let's have an awesome second one. May 12th, third show in Los Angeles. June 16th, Madison, Wisconsin. June 17th, Minneapolis, Minnesota. June 29th, Chicago, Illinois. And for those Midwest shows, for Madison, Minneapolis, and Chicago, that's all the way in June. So you can get tickets at ronplacone.com. Use the promo code Lucy at checkout for discounted tickets. That's the promo code Lucy at checkout for discounted tickets. That's an early bird special. It doesn't go on forever. So get your tickets now, ronplacone.com. And what's up, Wendy? Morning Status Coors. And Ron sipping coffee here in Portland, Oregon. What's up? Give my regards to Portland. Portland. Oh, man. And thank you for being up, everybody. Smooth criminal, punk rock Ron. I accept it. I appreciate it and accept it. I don't know if I am deserving of such a thing, but I appreciate it nonetheless. Yeah. And Nightbot brings up, don't forget to subscribe. Status Coup. Oh, and not only don't forget to subscribe if you're not already, but check your subscription and make sure you're still subscribed. Because people mess with YouTube messes with the subscriptions every day. So please make sure you're subscribed. And Marcy T, welcome. What's up? Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for tuning in for the FCC hearing. The regular Status Coup show will be at 5 p.m. Eastern today. This is a special show here for the Gigi Sohn FCC hearing. and it should be starting here very shortly. We're going to watch it together. We're going to talk about it in real time. And I know, like I said, most romantic thing ever. I know there's a lot of couples. I know there's a lot of people. This is basically your Valentine's Day celebration. I mean, it made it easy for you. It's like, well, should we go out to dinner? Should we get, like, what should we do? Should we go to a show? Should we go to a movie? Like, no, you know what? They made it easy on us. There's an FCC hearing. Oh, man. I was thinking romantic hike at sunset, but you're telling me an FCC hearing. Well, we're doing Valentine's Day in the morning, which, by the way, I shouldn't make light of because I know that a lot of people do Valentine's Day in the morning or lunchtime. You know who those people are? People with kids. I actually didn't know this. I didn't know this until actually over the weekend. I did a show with a couple other comics, and both those comics had children that they created with their Sigos, and they were saying, we were like, oh, what are you doing for Valentine's Day? And they said, oh, yeah, we're hoping to do a lunch or a breakfast. They were talking like that was totally normal. And I'm like, oh, is that a thing? And they're like, yeah, if you have kids, it's a thing. Like the kids are at school, so you're hoping to like go to lunch or breakfast, and that's your jam for Valentine's Day, which I didn't know that was a thing. But yeah, if you got kids, sometimes you do, which I'd imagine it's easier to get a reservation, and I imagine it's a little cheaper too. So I guess that's a way to play it. Maybe one year for Valentine's Day, my wife and I will do that. We actually acknowledged Valentine's Day on Sunday. We did a thing where we went to the restaurant / space where we got married. And it was our first time back there since our wedding. So we went back there, had a lovely dinner. They have a fantastic food there. And it was a really fun time. And we went Sunday because we figured like, oh, it'd be easier to get a reservation when we want and stuff the night of the Super Bowl than it would be. Oh, we're doing it. Look at this. They're filtering in. Yes, here it is. All right, so that's Miss Cantwell. That's officially beginning. Can we get some, let's get the volume on this, Colin.
Thank her for being here again today. If we want someone on the Federal Communications Commission who is truly committed to the job, then I believe Ms. Sohn fits that bill. She has a very long history at being part of a process at the FCC, and she is qualified. She will help deliver for the American people, and she has a key eye on something that all members of this committee care passionately about, and that is affordable, accessible broadband. Thank you for your leadership and your advocacy on that issue. Although she has been before our committee, she has now been criticized for important policies like standing up for free speech. I want to thank you for your policy positions, knowing that some same people like Justice Gorsuch or Rand Paul or many others believe in the Fourth Amendment. Thank you for articulating those views as well. These personal attacks are a distraction from the fact that Ms. Sohn is immensely qualified for this position and a highly effective would-be FCC commissioner. She has more than 30 years of experience working on telecommunications policy, including as senior advisor to Chairman Wheeler at the FCC. She's a prominent voice in the telecommunications area, and importantly, as I mentioned, on accessibility and affordability. And if confirmed, she would be the first openly gay commissioner of the FCC. Ms. Sohn has a history of putting the public interest first, regardless of whether that means supporting policies endorsed by Republicans or Democrats. She is well known for convening a broad range of stakeholders from both sides of the aisle on almost every part of the debate that we are looking at: regulatory frameworks, broadband deployment, broadcast issues, and mass media in the marketplace. This is why her nomination is supported by such a diverse group of people. Former Mississippi Representative Chip Pickering, who stated that Ms. Sohn will be a great advocate and championing of the principles of competition and the First Amendment. Preston Patton, former president of ABC and founding executive director of Fox Broadcast, who stated that she has worked with and with various individuals for 30 years and is one of the most prepared and experienced nominees. And Mr. Chris Ruddy, CEO of Newsmax, who has urged the confirmation of Ms. Sohn's nomination and the fact that she is committed to promoting diversity, localism, and competition in the marketplace. So it is no surprise that Ms. Sohn's career includes helping to ensure the carriages of all voices are heard. This is something this committee has to continue to work on, and I welcome the opportunity to work with my colleague, the ranking member, on this important issue. I know he has many views on this as well. But those many voices do include Fox Broadcasting, Newsmax, and O1 networks, some of the very same networks that our colleague wrote a letter about when they were deplatforming the large cable providers. So Ms. Sohn has been a consistent advocate for pro-consumers, common sense policies such as lowering the cost of broadband and working towards universal connectivity. Given that there is a great deal of work that needs to be done on this issue at the FCC, it is time to have a full commission. We know that just a sampling of the work includes the oversight of their mapping efforts, making sure that we put a stop to robocalls, caller ID spoofing, ensuring the United States adopts cutting-edge, forward-looking spectrum policies, and many other issues. I know she will be that voice, and it is critical that we have one right now. We know that she is capable of helping us implement what are the broadband deployments that we have just put a lot of resources against. But I would ask those who are trying to reposition Ms. Sohn to think about who it is you're really advocating for. The billions of dollars that people want to continue to have an expensive broadband, or the policies that will help us get true competition in the marketplace and finally deploy the types of broadband services that every American deserves. I hope that our hearing will help bring these issues that haven't been brought to light further to light, and that we have a healthy discussion, but we continue to respect the witness and her willingness to serve us at the FCC. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, the ranking member, Senator Cruz.
Oh, geez. Yeah, this guy.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Time for the clown show.
I appreciate your delaying this markup an hour so that we could all attend that classified briefing. I think it was important, and members on both sides were very interested in doing so. Vetting a nominee to the Federal Communications Commission is a serious task. The FCC is an agency with vast power over how Americans communicate and what information they access. It is also an agency with a history of abusing vague statutory provisions to pursue partisan policy goals. We know enough from today's
like repealing net neutrality.
What happens when power is put in the wrong hands. It doesn't take much to imagine a partisan FCC going down a dark path of attempting to censor what we see, hear, read, and ultimately think. As such, our responsibility as senators is to make sure that an FCC nominee not only has the expertise to be an independent regulator, but also possesses good judgment and temperament. The nominee must be fair, ethical, and perhaps most importantly, honest. On all of these fronts, this nominee has failed to meet the standard. There is a reason why we are on our third nomination hearing for Ms. Sohn. Both during this process and in her previous positions, she has shown herself to be a partisan who lacks the impartiality and candor necessary to serve in a leadership position at a powerful independent regulatory agency. And she has repeatedly displayed bad judgment and questionable ethics. She has associated herself repeatedly with the most radical views on the far left. I want to break.
He's referring to, she tweeted once that she doesn't like Fox News, by the way. This is what he's referring to. That's the radical thing she did. As a private person, she tweeted that she's not a fan of Fox News.
Piracy of broadcast content. The following year, the White House began vetting her for a spot on the FCC. During the vetting process, a reasonable individual might have stepped aside from Lowcast, but Ms. Sohn did not. Despite being considered to regulate the very same companies that were suing her organization for stealing from them, Ms. Sohn remained on Lowcast's board. Then in the fall of 2021, a federal judge found that Lowcast had engaged in illegal behavior, ordered it to stop operating, and awarded statutory damages of $32 million to the broadcasters. On October 26, 2021, President Biden announced his intent to nominate Ms. Sohn. Just one day later, Ms. Sohn signed an agreement settling the lawsuit. Ms. Sohn then hid significant details about the settlement from this committee. She actively misled senators about the settlement's dollar value and her ability to share settlement information with the committee. It's clear why. The settlement was a sweetheart deal. The broadcasters drastically reduced her organization's penalty by 98%, literally 2 cents on the dollar, from $32 million to $700,000. It was already improper that she executed a settlement with the broadcasters at the very same time she was being nominated to the FCC. But to then cut a sweetheart deal with them and to be dishonest with it, with members of this committee, is disqualifying. A basic requirement for public officials is trustworthiness. And on that front, Ms. Sohn has failed. If Ms. Sohn's brazen theft of intellectual property, her lack of candor, and her conflicts of interest weren't disqualifying on their own, then her long record of poor judgment should seal her fate.
This is complete gaslighting. Ajit Pai, Trump's appointee to head, was nothing more than a lobbyist his entire career. He was a complete lobbyist, a million conflicts of interest. He was confirmed within a couple weeks. This is complete gaslighting, and it's nonsense.
I have no doubt that my Democrat colleagues and their media allies would be apoplectic at this point. But sadly, this level of unseemliness is a pattern with Ms. Sohn. She has engaged in extreme vitriol against her political opponents repeatedly, and she has endorsed far-left radicals' character assassination attempts against numerous Republican and Democrat senators, indeed multiple senators sitting on this committee. She has deep ties to far-left organizations, engages repeatedly in partisan attacks, and has also promoted anti-police views. For example, she retweeted and liked posts by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez calling for defunding the police. And in July of 2020, during riots in Portland, Oregon, she retweeted a post attacking federal law enforcement officers as, quote, armed goons in riot gear with tear gas. It's no surprise that her nominee...
I already like her, Ted Cruz. You don't need to convince me more.
The Fraternal Order of Police and the National Sheriff's Association. Ms. Sohn portrays herself as a defender of free speech, but she has a history of campaigning to censor conservatives. She calls Fox News, quote, dangerous to our democracy, and has urged the FCC to revoke Sinclair's broadcast licenses. At the same time, she has a history of fighting against indecency regulations that protect children from exposure to filth on TV.
That's a straight up lie. He's convoluting a piece of policy called Sesta Fosta that every digital and human rights organization was opposed to because they actually read it and they saw what it actually did. It was a gross infraction on data privacy and free speech.
I'm going to call on the ranking member of the subcommittee, Senator Lujan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ranking Member Cruz, as the chair of the subcommittee, it's an honor to be here before you. Now, Ms. Sohn, it's been a year since you were last before the committee. Unfortunately, I missed your second hearing. I had a stroke, and it means a lot that you're back here so that I can fully participate in now your third hearing. In all full seriousness, I hope that there's a serious conversation today about your dedication and qualifications, and especially the dire need to fill the FCC. It's been 755 days that we don't have a full functioning FCC. I know that we want to get there. I hope that that's something that's supported by the entirety of the membership of this body. With each additional day, more ink is spilled over this nomination. Frankly, we get more deliberate attempts to extend this vacancy for as long as possible. Now, I'd like to take my time today to clarify the record and talk openly about what is happening. Fundamentally, this position remains vacant because the companies that are lawfully subject to oversight by the FCC don't want a watchdog. They don't want to be regulated, and these companies have spent an immense amount of money and influence to keep this position vacant. The more that I read, the more time that goes by, it seems more and more clear to me, and it's frustrating. because I know the importance of what these entities mean to the country, especially with building out the importance of the infrastructure in a bipartisan bill that we all supported together, and especially for those of us in more rural states with what a full functioning FCC will mean. Chair Camel, I ask for consent to enter into the record 5 documents.
Without objection.
A report by Margaret McKeel for Axios, an investigative report by Kat Kozowski and Cristino Lima for the Washington Post, Biden's internet promises in limbo amid long battle over FCC nominations, the mystery of Biden's deadlocked FCC by Nilay Patel from The Verge, and a report by Howard Buskert from Daily Communications on proposed fines against carriers for data violations appear stalled at a split FCC. A report by John Brodkin of Ars Technica ISP admits lying to FCC about the size of network to block future funding. So I appreciate that. A few things to highlight in these. First, last December, Senator Thune and I convened a hearing on digital discrimination in our subcommittee on communications, media, and broadband. We heard extensive testimony on the need for the FCC to craft rules preventing digital discrimination on broadband access. These rules are required by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investments and Job Act, but there's a significant pressure coming in the docket, and some, like the Wall Street Journal editorial board, are trying to turn the bipartisan priority into a partisan fight. It shouldn't be. Second, multiple reports have found that ISPs, big and small, provided false data to the FCC's maps in an anti-competitive effort to block rival companies from getting a share of the $42.5 billion this committee provided for broadband. Third and finally, before Christmas, in December 2022, internal documents indicated that Chairwoman Rosenworcel proposed fines against major wireless carriers for failing to safeguard data on real-time locations. For most Americans, the FCC is the only cop on the beat, protecting them from predatory data practices and ensuring internet companies provide accurate information. Chairwoman Rosenworcel requires a full commission to do her job enforcing current law to the fullest extent and to keep these companies accountable. We've heard from a lot of my colleagues. Now, some have suggested that you're not qualified. I disagree with that. The facts show that these arguments are just a bunch of hot air coming from a state with the largest international balloon fiesta. The record shows that Gigi Sohn is a dedicated public servant who's qualified and ready to be confirmed. She will act to uphold the law dutifully and honorably. Unfortunately, though, we're seeing this stalled for way too long. So, Madam Chair, I want to thank you and the ranking member and all of our colleagues for being here today. Ms. Sohn, for being here yet again for this important hearing, and I look forward to a vote, not just out of this committee, but on the full floor to support your confirmation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I misspoke earlier. The chair of the subcommittee, Chairman Lujan, and now if the ranking member of the subcommittee, Senator Thune, would like to make a statement.
Thank you.
So he made some good points there. He basically said how the cable companies and ISPs, internet service providers, are getting away with murder right now. They're getting away with so much, and nothing's being done about it because we don't have a fully staffed FCC, and that's why they're dragging their feet on Gigi. The cable lobbyists, the industry insiders, they don't want her there because they don't want an FCC that actually is going to be a cop on the beat, so to speak. I wish he could have dove into some of Ted Cruz's lies, but he probably didn't have enough time, to be fair. I mean, it probably would have taken all of his time to just start disputing those freaking lies.
Rules that I would remind people would regulate the internet like a public utility under Title II of a 1934 law. So that in and of itself, to me, represents a major problem from just a policy standpoint.
Gigi Sohn is Biden's nominee to the FCC. That would be a pro-net neutrality pick and basically reinstate a free and open internet.
Talk about this a little bit later, but the issue of leaking non-public confidential information further speaks to the fact that if confirmed, you're not going to bring the spirit of bipartisanship that present and past commissioners demonstrated. Your long record, I would say, of virulent partisanship has raised a number of questions as to whether or not you can serve as an impartial commissioner, and I think those concerns remain. You've been outspoken critic as Senator Cruz pointed out, of conservative media outlets that you would be in charge of regulating. You've supported far-left initiatives such as
And multiple conservative media outlets support her nomination, by the way.
and companies serving rural areas like those in my home state of South Dakota. So I would just close by saying that almost all, if not all, individuals in politics have strong convictions, but serious leaders demonstrate the ability to act in a fair and impartial manner. You have not, and Madam Chair, should this nomination come for a vote before this committee, I'd urge all my colleagues for those reasons and many others, which I'm sure we'll get into, to join me in opposing the nominee before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Thune. Now we will have an introduction by Ms. Sohn by Mr. Chad Roop, who's joining us remotely. He was a Trump administration official for the Rural Utility Services Department of Agriculture. He has been a long leader in rural broadband and developing state directors board working group. So you are also active in the effort in Wyoming. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Chairwoman Cantwell and Ranking Member Cruz, members of the committee. My name is Chad Roop, and I'm currently the General Manager of Ponderosa Communications. And as the Chairwoman mentioned, I'm also the former administrator for the RUS under the Trump administration and the former state broadband program manager for Montana. I'm here today, however, in my capacity as a friend of Gigi Sohn. And it's truly an honor for me to come before the committee to introduce her to you and to register my strong support for Gigi to be the next commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission. During my time as the USDA Rural Development State Director for Wyoming and as the administrator for RUS, I led the Trump administration's efforts to get broadband to our rural communities, including through the Reconnect Broadband Program and implementation of the 2018 Farm Bill. It was as the state broadband program manager for Montana that I got to know Gigi and see how she approaches challenges like bringing broadband to rural America. I saw that Gigi was deeply passionate about the importance of working to close the digital divide for all of our communities. I saw that she understands the term rural means much more than a designation given to an area based on population. She knows that each one is unique and presents varying challenges to connectivity. Importantly, I saw that she firmly believes that these are not partisan issues. And when we make them partisan, we fail to serve the folks in those rural communities who are just looking to ensure their families are able to enjoy the many benefits that come from broadband connectivity. For the past 5 years, Gigi has worked closely with state broadband leaders from states as different as Vermont, Nebraska, and Louisiana, providing them with counsel and connections with federal broadband leaders. In her previous 2 confirmation hearings, Gigi pledged to be the FCC's state liaison, and I have no doubt she will keep that promise. Such a role is critical now that the states have primary responsibility for ensuring that the billions of dollars provided in the bipartisan infrastructure law is well spent. The FCC's work has been crucial to ensuring that the economic, health, and educational benefits that flow over broadband are reaching all of our communities. More work needs to be done for sure, and Congress has taken an all-of-government approach to moving that great work forward. And the role of the FCC in those efforts is as crucial as it has ever been. Gigi will be a great addition to the commission as it seeks to fulfill the charge that Congress has tasked it with performing. And in closing, I would say to this committee that I was proud to learn that there are over 400 organizations and leaders that agree with me. Gigi will be a great commissioner. They include Republican and Democratic state and local legislators, business leaders, consumer advocates, and over 350,000 citizens. Gigi is a dedicated public servant and a strong voice for consumers and a hard worker who will bring her 35 years of work elevating the public's interest to the portfolio of work before the commission. I urge this committee and the Senate to swiftly confirm her to this post. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Roop. Just one question for you. Are those the Tetons behind you?
That is Yosemite, actually, Chairwoman. Ponderosa Communications is proud to serve about 10,000 telephone and broadband subscribers in California, in the Sierra Nevadas, as well as in rural communities in Arizona. So fortunately, it's a great family-owned rural business that's been in operation since 1908. So we're very proud to serve these rural areas.
Thank you. It definitely is going to be a very big focus of this committee, is to make sure that we get broadband expansion in rural communities. So I'm sure we'll hear a lot about that today. Ms. Sohn, welcome. If you want to introduce any family members, but you're welcome to make an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Cantwell, and good morning, Ranking Member Cruz and members of the committee. Today I'm joined by my wife, Laura, our daughter, Jocelyn, and my brother, Adam. I want to acknowledge my mother, Roma, who can't be here today. People who know her say that I get my determination and fortitude from her. Since there are several new committee members, let me introduce myself. I grew up with 3 brothers in a middle-class household on Long Island. I still say Long Island. My father was an accountant for the Grumman Corporation, and my mother was one of the first physician assistants certified in New York State. My formative years were filled with sports and music, including cheering for my beloved Mets and Jets. A broadcasting law course in my sophomore year at Boston University changed my life. I was fascinated with the power of communications networks to inform public discourse and promote democratic values, and was awakened to the important role government can play in ensuring that all voices are heard. After law school and private practice, I started what has been a nearly 35-year career as a public interest lawyer advocating for policies that ensure that modern communications networks are available to everyone, regardless of who they are or where they live. For the past 2 decades, I have worked towards the goal of ensuring that every U.S. household has robust and affordable broadband internet access. From 2013 to 2016, I was privileged to serve as counselor to then FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler, where I gained the invaluable experience of working inside the agency and learning the different tools needed to be an effective policymaker. Today, at my 3rd confirmation hearing, 15 months after I was nominated, I'd like to answer a question that I know is on the minds of many on the dais and in this room. Why am I still President Biden's nominee for the 5th seat on the FCC? There are 4 reasons. First, I care deeply about the mission of the FCC and have dedicated my entire career to that mission, ensuring that everyone, regardless of income level, race, gender, sexual orientation, or where they live, has access to affordable and robust communications networks so they can be full participants in our economy, our education and healthcare systems, our culture, and our democracy. I've accomplished a great deal as a public advocate, but after I left the FCC, I knew I wanted to one day return as a public servant to continue this important work. Second, I believe it's critical for at least one member of the FCC to be a consumer advocate who has spent a career not beholden to any interests but those of the public. I've certainly worked with industry towards common goals, and many in industry are among the over 400 groups that support my confirmation. But my roots and my heart are with everyday Americans the FCC by law is tasked to serve. Third, I'm extremely well qualified. Even those who oppose my confirmation agree that I have a deep knowledge of the issues before the FCC, and thanks to my time working at the agency, I know how it operates. I'm proud of my bipartisan network that includes pretty much every FCC stakeholder, including state and local officials, tribal leaders, industry, academia, public interest, public safety, civil rights, and the disability community. I know everybody, and they know me. They also know, regardless of whether we agree on policy, that I'm a straight shooter who will listen, try to find common ground, and take their equities into account. Lastly, I believe deeply that regulated entities should not choose their regulator. Unfortunately, that is the exact intent of the past 15 months of false and misleading attacks on my record and on my character. My industry opponents have hidden behind dark money groups and surrogates because they fear a pragmatic, pro-competition, pro-consumer policymaker who will support policies that will bring more, faster, and lower-priced broadband and new voices to your constituents. The FCC has been without a majority for the entirety of the Biden administration, over 2 years, at a time when closing the digital divide is front and center. There are too many important issues in front of the Commission to lack a full complement of members, including improving the broadband maps, fixing the Universal Service Fund, closing the homework gap, ensuring fair access to broadband, and protecting consumers' privacy. Americans deserve a full FCC where I could play a critical role in addressing every one of these. The time is of the essence. In closing, I want to give my heartfelt thanks to President Biden for his belief in me, to Chairwoman Cantwell and her staff for their constant support, and to the other committee members and their staffs who have worked so hard on my behalf and on behalf of the American people. If I'm confirmed, I look forward to working with all the members of the committee, as well as the sitting commissioners, to achieve universal connectivity in the United States. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sohn. And I'm going to try to go quickly because we have 5-minute rounds, and I'm going to try to stick to that with everybody. And hopefully the comedy of this effort will get information out for people. So first of all, it is impressive that you have so many conservatives supporting your nomination. And I do think that speaks to your work for so many years in the field and your commitments to those issues of free speech. One of the
Yeah, if anything Ted Cruz was saying was remotely true, she wouldn't have all that conservative support. Just an aside there. So you know, I mean, that's just evidence that everything he said was complete and utter nonsense.
I think, me personally, I think the Congress is the best place to deal with that issue ultimately, because I think whatever the FCC does ends up probably in a legal dispute. So, but that aside, I started thinking the vitriol of these attacks made me think that no, it's even more than this, that somehow you are a smart, talented individual that's going to go there and fight for affordable broadband anywhere.
Absolutely.
And somehow, if affordable broadband gets deployed anywhere, then somehow more affordable broadband might get deployed everywhere. So I think there's probably billions of dollars at stake here. And that is why the vitriol is coming at you. Now, I hope that we can see through that today and really talk about the issues. I do want to talk about a couple of things, though, that have been brought up by my colleagues. So I'll get back to the issue of affordable broadband. So a lot of people have made things of tweets. These are retweets. Is that correct? Most of the things that people have talked about are retweets. Is that correct?
Retweets and likes, yes.
Okay. So I'm not saying I mean, we all should be held accountable, but my guess is I don't know that any of these people up here could be probably on any job if we looked at all of their tweets and retweets and looked at what people said.
Yeah, I heard Ted Cruz has a thing for porn, by the way. You guys remember that?
The Fraternal Order of Police. Do you support Edward Snowden?
No, I actually think Edward Snowden is a Russian asset. I do not support Edward Snowden, and I think it's important to say that when somebody is on the board of an organization, it doesn't mean that they agree with every single thing they do. I'm on the board of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I'm a proud board member, but they are involved in about 50 different issues, and there are some things I care deeply about and I agree with, some things I don't agree with at all, including their embrace of Edward Snowden, and some things, frankly, are not in my wheelhouse.
I agree with you. I think it gets complicated. I mean, Peter.
So I strongly disagree with Gigi Sohn on that particular issue. I strongly disagree with what she just said about Edward Snowden, but I respect the fact that she's acknowledging, hey, the EFF, which is the Electronic Frontier Foundation, an organization that she sits on the board of and does support Edward Snowden. She's like, look, you know, I'm not going to agree with everything a particular board or a particular organization does, and they're not going to agree with every view I have. And yeah, while I do strongly disagree with Gigi Sohn when it comes to Edward Snowden, that really has no bearing on the type of FCC commissioner she will be. She's still beyond qualified for this job, and she will be making the types of votes that a free and open internet wants to see. The fact that I disagree with her on Edward Snowden, yeah, it's a bummer, but it will not play any role in the type of FCC commissioner she would be. It's just not really applicable.
Alignment here about what your view is, at least from the perspective of that letter, and I hope that we can continue to have some information and correction on that. And to this point of the settlement, again, another board that you were on and another settlement, which you didn't have anything to do with the details of the settlement. And in consequence, you also, when you were before this committee, were prohibited in talking about the exact details. I think my colleague, Senator Wicker, tried to get you on this point, but you were prohibited by law from discussing that settlement amount as a board member. So I just want, if you could clarify this again for the members quickly.
Yes, I think there's a couple things that need to be clarified. First of all, I was bound by the settlement agreement. Okay, I was not a party to the litigation, so I never had any liability whatsoever. So this notion that, I got some sort of sweetheart deal, there was never a sweetheart deal as to me. Frankly, there wasn't even a sweetheart deal as to Locast. So there was a settlement decided on October 12th. That was 2 weeks before I was nominated, and I did not know at the time that I was going to be nominated, that Locast would pay $700,000 to the networks. Then there was 2 weeks later, okay, the document that I signed talked about $32 billion. Now that was never, I'm sorry, Senator Cruz, you're wrong. The judge never said that there was a penalty of $32 million, and the judge never said that Locast had any liability whatsoever.
Well,
Okay.
we're going to get into this, and my time has expired, but I just, I want people to know, you came to the second hearing after that decision, so we could have the airing. So I feel like you showed a great deal of transparency on this issue, and I appreciate it, and I'll have to get back to my lowering cost of broadband for the second round. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Sohn, this is your third hearing. That is highly unusual. One of the reasons that you've had three hearings, is that in the first hearing, you went through the entire hearing without disclosing the sweetheart settlement concerning Locast. And the entire purpose of the second hearing was when that came to light. You actively misled Ranking Member Wicker when he asked you in writing about the $32 million settlement. You did not correct the record that it was in fact only 2% of that amount, $700,000. You also disclosed at that second hearing that you never notified the White House of this sweetheart deal, even though you signed it literally the day after they announced their intention to nominate you. My question is this: do you think that your failure to disclose the secret deal to this committee and your failure to disclose it to the White House, do you think that reflected poor judgment, yes or no?
No, I answered Senator Wicker's question honestly, okay? And on advice of counsel.
No, you don't think it was poor judgment?
No, I do not, because
All right.
I was bound
All right,
by the
I wanna move
confidentiality agreement of the settlement.
With respect, no, you were not. The
was a
confidentiality
gaslighting
agreement,
question.
section 6.0, prohibited you from communicating with the media or the press. The last I checked, the United States Senate is not the media or the press. You had an obligation to answer this body accurately, and you did not. I would note the White House is not the media or the press, and you told this committee you didn't inform the president of it either. Let me move on. You don't think it was poor judgment to mislead this committee or to mislead the president who was nominating you. Let me ask you a second question.
Senator, I
during the
don't
fi-
agree that I misled this committee, so I would like to make that.
The record is, I believe, abundantly clear, and in fact, I will be sending out my cross-examination from the last hearing, where you repeatedly mislead this committee in that hearing. And in fact, we'll go ahead and actually put this up. I'll note, I asked, did you disclose to the committee that agreement? I did. Did you disclose the agreement to the committee? I did. Hold on a second. Did you disclose to this committee? Yes or no? I did. You disclosed the $700,000 secret settlement? No. So 3 times you say I did, and then, oh, no. You did not. You misled this committee, and you also misled the White House. Let me ask you secondly, the 15 months that your nomination has been pending, you've made not 1, not 2, not 3, you've made 12 separate political contributions to senators running for office. I've been in the Senate 10 years. I have never seen a nominee make contributions to senators while your nomination is pending. I've never seen that once. I had my staff search the records. If we could find anyone in the Trump administration who had done that, my staff was unable to find that. You've been a significant political donor over the years, giving over $32,000. You gave. Do you believe it was poor judgment to give 12 separate political contributions to Democrat senators while your nomination was pending?
Senator, I'm a citizen who just wanted to participate
So
in the
yes or no?
Democratic
Do you
process.
think
The
it's
answer
poor
is no.
judgment to cut checks to senators who are voting on your nomination while it's pending? No other nominee that we can find has ever done that. Do you think it was poor judgment?
Relatively small donations, no, I don't.
It was over $1,000, $32,000 over your life.
Well, that's over my life,
Well, over $1,000 while your nomination was pending. All right.
but not to one person. Most
Oh,
of
no,
most
there
of
were
the
to a dozen senators, to a dozen different senators, including senators who've been critical of your nomination and senators who have not. You managed to cover the waterboard of Democrats running for office. All right, let's turn to another issue, which is you have been an active supporter of a left-wing activist group called Fight for the Future. And I will say the record of Fight for the Future is really quite remarkable because they have blasted members of this committee on both sides of the aisle. Here's a billboard that Fight for the Future put up in West Virginia in 2017 attacking Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat. The billboard essentially accuses Joe Manchin of being corrupt. Ms. Sohn.
Full disclaimer, I collaborate with Fight for the Future. Thanks for the shout out, Ted.
I will point out, in 2017, Fight for the Future also erected similar billboards accusing Senator Tester and Senator Peters of being corrupt, both of whom are members of this committee. I can't recall a nominee who's actively supported efforts to blast members of this committee to run billboards.
Senator, may I address that, please?
You may.
When you say actively, I give every single organization with whom I work on net neutrality $100 contributions at the end of the year.
Ms. Sohn, with
Doesn't
respect,
mean I agree with their
respect,
tactics.
the time is limited, and yes, it does, because after they put up the billboards attacking Manchin, Tester, and Peters as corrupt, afterwards, you sent this tweet. Just made my end-of-year donation to this organization, urging others to do it after they did that. And because the time is limited, I'll note this group also blasted Marsha Blackburn, Dan Sullivan, and Roger Wicker, and astonishingly called for Chairwoman Cantwell to be fired. And after each of those, to be removed from as chairwoman of this committee, after each of those, you supported it. And in fact, I want to turn to the final point, the Roger Wicker one, where this group protested and said, you're buying a senator, and you said you don't support their tactics. I'm going to point out, you tweeted, well done, to this radical group who blasted the former ranking member of this committee and saying that his donors were trying to buy a senator. If they were trying to buy a senator, were you trying to buy senators when you made a dozen contributions?
Senator, I did not know, number one, that was about Senator Wicker. Number two, I was criticizing Senator
Roger Wicker right there.
Okay, well,
that is literally what you retweeted was his name.
That's fine, but I was actually criticizing the donors and not criticizing the senator.
Senator Markey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have known Gigi Sohn for 30 years. Ms. Sohn is one of the single most qualified candidates for any position to ever come before the Commerce Committee for confirmation. We knew that before Ms. Sohn testified before this committee in December of 2021 as President Biden's nominee for the FCC based on her decades of service protecting the public interest, that she had an outstanding record. And we certainly know that now, as Ms. Sohn comes before the committee for a third time, that her record is historically good. Since President Biden selected Ms. Sohn, she has become the subject of smears, double standards, and personal attacks. And let's be clear, it's not just Ms. Sohn who has suffered during this process. The American people have suffered as well. Because in the time when telecommunications policy and broadband are more important than ever, the Federal Communications Commission, the expert agency, has been missing a commissioner. And without Ms. Sohn, the FCC has been unable to take critical steps to close the digital divide, make sure the internet remains free and open for everyone, protects consumers, and ends the homework gap once and for all for American children. So make no mistake, every day that Ms. Sohn goes without being on the FCC is a win for giant telecommunications companies and their army of lobbyists here in Washington, D.C. It is a loss for the American people. And why do the giant companies oppose Ms. Sohn? Because she believes in Darwinian, paranoia-inducing competition in the telecommunications field. She believes in consumer protections. Those giant incumbent companies want to change the name to incumbent communications companies. They don't believe in competition, and they don't believe in consumer protections. And that's why they don't want Gigi Sohn on the committee. So I would like to actually, for the record, introduce the 400 individuals and organizations who are supporting her for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. And I would like to turn to you, Ms. Sohn, with the remainder of my time and give you an opportunity to respond to any of the accusations that have already been made about you in this committee.
Yeah, I'd actually like to address something that Senator Thune talked about an alleged leak at the FCC. And what he's talking about was an Inspector General report, 2016, 7 years ago, where the Inspector General found that because Chairman Wheeler had authorized me to speak to the press about something that was non-public, that it became public. So there was no leak, and the Inspector General cleared everybody of wrongdoing. So I think it's really important to understand that when you're talking about my honesty and integrity, the IG report found no wrongdoing, and there was no leak. That is a meme that keeps getting repeated, and that just frankly drives me a little bit nuts. The other thing I wanted to discuss was back to the low-cast case. The low-cast case was never about money. Even before I joined the board in 2019, 2 months after the case was filed, the parties agreed that this case was not about piracy, that it was about whether low-cast qualified for an exemption as a nonprofit under the copyright law. And that's why this case has never been about money. What the networks wanted and why they settled was because they wanted low-cast gone. And that $32 million was just put in a public document in order to scare away the next low-cast.
Meaning that they wanted to ensure that there was a deterrent to any other competitors that might want to get into the communication sector. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, so $32 million was what the plaintiffs could have gotten had we gone to trial, okay, and we appealed. We decided not to appeal, even though, frankly, the case was weak. The networks were delighted. In fact, they were pressuring us to settle because it was such a weak decision.
So you settled, or Locast settled, because of the incumbent telecommunications companies that wanted to settle.
Yes, so, and that's the other thing. A settlement is an agreement between two parties. That's why I find it odd to call it a sweetheart deal. You're talking on one side about the most powerful networks, right? The 4 broadcast networks, and I think there were some other broadcasters as well, versus this little nonprofit that had a $2 million budget. I mean, it's a settlement. It's an agreement between two parties. It's not a sweetheart deal. I think the broadcasters got exactly what they wanted. Locast did not get what it wanted. Locast wanted to stay in business.
There are so many red herrings against your candidacy. We might have to put an aquarium here in the well of the committee
Amen.
to accommodate them all. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me just go back, because you mentioned something about this being a proxy fight over net neutrality. And it really isn't that.
Yes, it is.
But we did go back. We restored in 2017, those rules were reversed. 6 years since then, broadband access has expanded and reached more rural areas. Internet speeds have increased. There's more competition, creating more value to consumers here in the United States. And even in the UK, which imposed heavy-handed net neutrality regulations in 2016, it moved to lessen its net neutrality regulations after seeing a decrease in broadband investment and not being able to meet consumers' demands through the course of the pandemic.
Broadband investment increased because of that bill the Biden
You said,
administration passed. It has nothing to do with
I mean,
net
your
neutrality.
support for that is very clear.
This man is conflating issues.
But the reason I don't think this is it's not a proxy on net neutrality, your nomination.
Yes, it is.
I think what perhaps it is a proxy on is the partisanship with which you approach not only that issue, but every other issue. There was an attempt here on this committee to try and come up with a bipartisan agreement to deal with the issue of blocking, throttling, paid prioritization, all those sorts of things. And then the FCC under Chairman Wheeler, who was a very partisan FCC chairman, probably the most partisan in history, decided to go their own way. And so my question, I guess, having to do with that subject, because I want to get to one other issue that you mentioned, but let's just say, for example, that Congress were to decide, to do something on this issue of blocking, for example. Do you believe that the FCC should come to Congress for more direction before attempting any iteration of net neutrality rules to prevent the back and forth between administrations, which is what we will see when administrations flip and the FCC changes majorities? You're going to get this back and forth, which creates no stability, no predictability, and completely undermines the conditions for investment if you want to continue to see the technology expand and grow. So I guess the question is, do you think that the FCC ought to come to Congress before you do something like that? Yes or no?
As Senator, I think I said this in both my prior hearings, I would love for Congress to give the FCC proper authority and specific authority to adopt net neutrality rules. Now, net neutrality has been repealed now for, we've been debating net neutrality for over 20 years, and Congress has not done so. And net neutrality was repealed, and authority, that's the most important thing I want to make clear, is that to me, the issue is not about blocking and throttling and paid prioritization. It's about whether an agency, which was created in 1934 to oversee communications networks, should have the power to oversee the most powerful communications network of our time. Congress has had 2 decades now to decide that authority, and it's refused to do so. However, I still believe Congress should do so, and I beg Congress to do so. But until then, until it does so, the agency
So if we
has got
came
to
up
have
with something
authority.
up here that, for example, legislation that would prevent blocking, but only blocking, would you support that? Yes or no?
As a partial solution, yes, but not as the entire solution.
All right, let's shift to the, as you'll likely recall, as part of a request I made to the FCC when serving as chairman of this committee, you were named, you mentioned this as being a source for a leak of confidential information that ultimately turned what could have been a bipartisan decision to adopt a cap for the Lifeline program into a partisan vote that left the program uncapped at the time. You recall this particular investigation. You said
Absolutely.
You do, yes or no? So is it correct that you did leak certain information about the FCC's Lifeline order to the press at the direction of then Chairman Wheeler? Yes or no?
It was not a leak. I will admit that I called Politico and told them that there was a deal, although I did not reveal the amount of the cap, because Chairman Wheeler authorized me. And when he authorized me, as the IG says on the final page, that turned non-public information into public information. So at that point, it was no longer a leak.
Well, on the IG report, the point isn't that it was illegal, but that it blew up a bipartisan deal. So I want to come back to my original premise, and that is your activities at the FCC previous, everything that you've advocated since, including activity in political campaigns, which has already been alluded to, suggests that you would be a very partisan influence on a commission that, in my view, deals with issues where you need to try and find some consensus. What happened with the IG report, and I've got a copy of the IG report here,
Was the G5 not
a
partisan?
deal which was in the throes of being made between the all 5 commissioners, Republicans and Democrats, was scuttled. I mean, it was tanked. It was torpedoed by going public and trying to undermine that deal. That, to me, is, I think, the essence of what the IG report suggests, and I think it does get at the very heart of your qualifications as an FCC commissioner.
Yeah.
And I know I'm out of time, so I would just add one final point, and I said this before at a hearing last year, and that is the issues. There was an op-ed that Heitkamp, former senator, Democrat senator from North Dakota.
He's out of time.
submitted
He's going
while
to give you
your
a document now.
nomination was under consideration previously, in which she says Sohn is wrong for the FCC and rural America based on your comments, critical comments, about delivery of broadband in rural areas.
I'm going to let
Madam
Ms.
Chair,
Sohn respond to that, thank you, quickly, and then we're going to Senator
Yeah.
Klobuchar.
So just 2 things really quickly. Chairman Wheeler, and it's in the IG report, would have gone along with that vote The only reason that I was asked to call Politico was because the meeting kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed, and we were just being inundated with calls, okay? So Wheeler actually would have done anything that Commissioner Clyburn would have asked to do. So that's number one. Number two, on the Heitkamp point, I'm supported by, as you saw, Chad Roop, former RUS administrator for the Trump administration, Hilda Gay Legg, former RUS administrator for the Bush administration, and TCA, the Rural Broadband Association, WTA, Rural Broadband Advocates, and the Rural Wireless Association. And that's because I believe they need better broadband, and I'm absolutely a huge supporter. What I have criticized and what Senator Heitkamp took way out of context was a speech that I gave that said that the federal government had not done a good enough job with the $50 billion it had over a decade in getting rural broadband to America. So she took what I said completely out of context. I'm a
Thank you,
huge
Ms.
supporter of
Sohn.
rural broadband, and my supporters prove it.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair,
Senator,
the IG report, the whole point was to scuttle a bipartisan deal on Lifeline.
Senator Klobuchar.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Sohn. Let's take off on the broadband issue, which is.
Why
so
does she
big
always
to
sound
so
like
many
she's
of
about
us,
to cry
especially
whenever she
those
talks?
of us
Like I'm
with
sorry.
rural
What is
areas. We know the FCC is responsible, one of the key agencies responsible for the rollout of the bipartisan infrastructure law. How does the lack of a full commission, which has been going on for way too long, ultimately affect consumers who need reliable, affordable internet access?
Well, it affects them in a myriad of different ways. I mean, first, and this is one of my frustrations of not having been confirmed yet, is I would love to be able to help the FCC ensure that they have the most accurate broadband map that they could possibly have. Now, I can't fix it myself, but I have unbelievable relationships with the states, including many of the states of folks that sit on this dais, and I would love to help improve that broadband map. And without an accurate broadband map, the money that is going to be spent by the Commerce Department is not going to go to the right places. And this is not to criticize the FCC. I think they're doing the best they can with what they have. But I could be an enormous help in that regard. There are many other things. I'll stop there.
Okay. I want to turn to something else I care a lot about, and I think you and I have talked about this before, and that's 911 centers. An estimated 240 million calls are made to 911 centers annually. However, often they are relying on outdated technologies. In many places, it doesn't even support text messages, which is how so many people are going to contact 911. Can you speak to the importance of upgrading 911 systems? I'm one of the chairs of the 911 caucus. I've always cared a lot about this issue. And if confirmed, could you talk about what you think needs to be done?
Yeah, look, there's nothing more important that the FCC does that ensures that the public is safe. And when I was at the FCC with Chairman Wheeler, we actually started the proceeding that kind of got kicked off NG 911, and that's why public safety officials and NENA, which is the 911 Association, support my confirmation. So I would want to improve NG 911 if I am confirmed, and certainly ensure that it works properly in rural areas, because I know that is a problem.
Okay. Speaking of something else that you've touched on before about rural areas, and that is back to the broadband issue. In rural areas of my state, about 16% of households lack access at even baseline speeds. And could you talk about your plans after this bill has been passed for achieving universal access to broadband, specifically in rural communities?
Yes, thanks, Senator. What I believe deeply is that the FCC needs to work very, very closely with the NTIA to ensure that it's really over $47 billion that the broadband infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure law has put out for broadband deployment is well spent. And that the states have the wherewithal to spend that money wisely. Because what we don't want is to come back in 5 years and say, wow, We spent $47 billion, and we still have huge swaths of America, of rural America, and frankly, urban America, that don't have adequate broadband. So I think the FCC needs to be a partner with the NTIA in implementing the terms of the infrastructure law and making sure that that money is spent, the taxpayer money is spent wisely and effectively. Thank you. One of the issues that have come up over the years is the mapping, and maps have been a serious problem. I know you know that. The Broadband Data Act, which I led with Senators Wickers and Peters and Thune, is focused on improving the FCC's data collection process to get more accurate maps. It was signed into law in March of 2020. Talk about how you're going to be able to focus on maps, if confirmed, to the areas that are served or unserved. Senator, I'll make this vow to everybody in this room and on this dais. If I am confirmed, the first thing I am going to do is offer my assistance to the chairwoman to do anything that it takes to make those maps as accurate as possible. So when NTIA gives out that money or allocates that money on June 30th, we have the best map possible in the time that we have. Now, the map is iterative, and it's going to keep getting better, but that June 30th date is a really, really critical date. And that's why time is really of the essence to get me confirmed, because if I don't get confirmed at all, there's not going to be a fifth person on the FCC in time to do anything about those maps. So I care deeply about this issue because I worked really, really hard on the broadband provisions of the infrastructure law. I was the person who sold it to the public interest community. It was not everything that the public interest community wanted, but I thought it was important because it was bipartisan and it was a lot of money. And it could do a lot of good, and I'd like to continue that.
Thank you. Senator Peters.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Sohn, well, certainly thank you for appearing before the committee now a third time, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to further discuss both your priorities and my priorities and how the FCC can best serve Americans. First question is related to auto safety, and as chairman of the Surface Transportation Subcommittee, I'm focused on improving safety on our roadways. Nearly 43,000 people died on our roads in 2021, the largest year-over-year increase since we began collecting records. And many of these deaths are avoidable if we facilitate broad deployment of roadway safety technologies like CV2S, which basically stands for Cellular Vehicle to Everything technology. And that's why state departments of transportation, industry, safety groups, and academia have all lined up to ask the FCC to grant waivers to allow the deployment of this life-saving technology, which among other things can enable vehicles to see around corners beyond visual line of sight, provide safety warnings at blind intersections, alert driver to poor road conditions, or active school or work zones. Previous studies have estimated that deploying this technology could eliminate or mitigate the severity of more than 80% of light vehicle crashes. Deployment will also keep us from falling behind other nations that are already integrating this technology into their infrastructure. And that's why yesterday, Senator Lummis and I sent a letter to the FCC urging it to take action to grant these waivers and move forward on this technology within the auto safety spectrum. Madam Chair Cantwell, I would, without objection, like to submit the bipartisan letter. Thank you. So, Ms. Sohn, my question to you is, do you agree that it's important for Americans that we protect auto safety spectrum and deploy safety technologies like CV2X on American roadways?
Absolutely, sir. Yes.
Thank you. Second, as you know, in 2020, Congress passed the Secure and Trusted Communications Act to ensure that American broadband networks were free from the influence of Chinese state-connected companies like Huawei and ZTE. In that bill, Congress promised broadband providers that we would help them pay and, quote, rip and replace this equipment. So my first question is to you. Do you agree with the Secure and Trusted Communications Act that it is critical to our national security to eliminate Chinese state-connected technologies from U.S. networks?
Yes, sir, and I also agree with former Commissioner O'Reilly that it is underfunded right now and needs more money.
Well, that leads to the next question. Certainly, securing the networks is essential, and that's why I've been disappointed by Congress' failure to close the rip and replace funding shortfall that rural providers are facing as they try to remove Huawei and other equipment from their broadband networks. So the first time you were before this committee, we talked about the importance of supporting innovative broadband solutions like Northern Michigan University's Educational Access Network in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And now that very network and the communities that it serves are basically being held hostage by a $27 million funding shortfall to carry out this rip and replace mandate. As Michigan's representative here in Congress and in the Senate, I'm committed to getting this funding, of course, across the finish line. But my question for you as an FCC commissioner, would you commit to working with the Hill and rural broadband providers to ensure that they are supported throughout this critical process to secure our networks?
Yes, sir, and in fact, I just met with a bunch of members of the Rural Wireless Association who talked to me about their concerns of invoices not getting paid for rip and replace. So I have a great relationship with those broadband providers, and yes, I absolutely will work with them.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Fisher, and I apologize, she should have been next before, so thank you for your indulgence. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is now the third time that Ms. Sohn has come before the committee. She's given dismissive and evasive answers and outright flipped on positions she had otherwise consistently taken throughout her career. I continue to have serious concerns about the nominee's record. She has troubling conflicts of interest, which prompted her second appearance before the committee last year. She was a leading board member of Locast, a company that pirated content from local broadcasters. A federal court issued an injunction against her company from operating this illegal scheme. Ms. Sohn tried to do damage control in our hearings. She eventually promised to recuse herself from certain proceedings at the FCC if confirmed. I believe this promise essentially admitted to conflicts of interest on matters such as retransmission consent and television copyrights. But her recusal was non-binding and vaguely construed. Her answers to hearing questions also showed no regret for her actions. She even downplayed the situation by emphasizing that Locast was just a nonprofit, framing the company as if it were a charity. It is not. The FCC is charged with protecting intellectual property rights. Copyright protections are the lifeblood of local broadcasters. But Ms. Sohn thinks she's some kind of copyright Robin Hood. She told this very committee that she thought she was helping broadcasters while she was, in fact, stealing their content. It's incredible. Locast wasn't the first copyright controversy centered around Ms. Sohn. She also championed the FCC's failed set-top box order while she was a senior advisor at the commission. That order received major blowback for the lack of transparency around its drafting and circulation as well. I previously questioned Ms. Sohn about transparency concerns, such as why she bragged on a public panel about concealing another controversial order as a senior FCC advisor. Then there was the Inspector General report, which I would say found that she did leak confidential documents to the press while employed at the FCC. Her actions purposely derailed a bipartisan agreement to reform the Lifeline program. I'm certain we will only see more of this partisan deceptive conduct if the Senate moves this nomination forward. The FCC's mission rests on advancing communications in ways that serve the public interest. I'm afraid Ms. Sohn and I have very different outlooks about what's in the public interest. I cannot support a nominee who would put rural broadband access on the back burner. I cannot support a nominee who has willfully jeopardized local broadcast stations. I cannot support a nominee who would oversee public safety communications but has amplified rhetoric to defund the police. And I cannot support a nominee who has a record of acting unethically while working at the very agency to which he is nominated. I voted for Democratic FCC nominees in the past, including Chairman Rosenworcel and Chairman Stark and Commissioner Starks. I do not agree with all of their positions, but they were qualified, and they were not driven by bias. This nomination
fully staffed
has
FCC
turned
wasn't
into
a
a
mistake.
spectacle because of the nominee's own record and actions. I will not support a
just don't want a
partisan
fully
nominee,
staffed
and I
FCC.
urge the administration to withdraw the nomination. At the previous two hearings, I have asked the nominee questions, and I have no additional questions at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Next, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Sohn, did you have something you wanted to respond to?
Well, it might take up the full 5 minutes. I would like an opportunity to respond to Senator Fisher.
I
because-
asked no questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Ms. Sohn, opponents to your nomination continue to classify your support of net neutrality as, quote, extreme, end quote. Ms. Sohn, do a majority of Republican and Democratic voters support net neutrality?
By overwhelming margins.
So a majority of Americans, Democratic voters, Republican voters, independents, believe net neutrality is needed. Now, to me, that's the opposite of extreme. We should ensure our internet providers are common carriers and prohibited from prioritizing or discriminating lawful content on their networks. Ms. Sohn, you have a strong record of defending free speech and viewpoints from across the aisle. At the FCC and as a public interest advocate for decades, you have continuously fought for the rights of both conservative and liberal voices. Yes or no, do you commit to upholding and promoting the free speech rights of all Americans?
Absolutely.
Can you reiterate for this committee some of the endorsements you've received from organizations across the spectrum?
Sure. Organizations include Newsmax, the president of OAN. These are two of the most conservative cable networks on the planet, and I've received some blowback on the left from that. Parents Television Council, which is a very conservative organization that fights to keep obscenity and indecency off broadcasting. I have support from Preston Padden, as we talked before, who was a former Fox News lobbyist, Chad Roop, Hilda Gay Legg, Daniel Linville of West Virginia, who is as conservative as you can get. He's a West Virginia
Ms.
legislator.
Sohn, I'm going to interject here. I didn't realize the list was so long.
It's longer.
What I'll ask is that you
Yeah, it's
submit
way
them into
longer.
the record so that we have them for the record as
Absolutely.
well. Now, Ms. Sohn, we've gone over 2 years without a full commission at the FCC. The cost to the American public for this vacancy has been extreme. The FCC is charged with overseeing some of the most critical sectors of the American economy, media and communications. These are massive industries that are also on the verge of receiving a historic amount of public funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The FCC is the lawful regulator and enforcement agency for the federal government's effort to fight against robocalls and to ensure consumers have a voice on their side when they have an issue with their cable, cell, or broadband provider. Every second we wait, to me, the worse it gets. Can you please discuss the cost this long-term vacancy has had on American consumers?
Yes, Senator Lujan, you actually mentioned some of them early on in your opening statement. One that really comes to mind is the fact that a $200 million penalty against some wireless carriers who sold personal information to data brokers who then sold them to bounty hunters. And those bounty hunters find people that don't want to be found, including domestic violence victims. They cannot vote that out because they don't have a third vote. I mean, this is a no-brainer. Similarly, now there've been at least 3 major reports about carriers who lied, flat out lied, and admitted finally that they lied about where they provide service. The FCC cannot, they cannot do anything to try to deter that kind of conduct. So the enforcement mechanism of the FCC, when it comes to things like that, really is almost shut down. But other things they can't do are extend E-rate funding to classrooms, fix or do anything with regard to the media ownership rules, fix the Universal Service Fund, which is something that a lot of people on this dais want to happen. So and of course, they can't reinstate the authority to oversee broadband and impose net neutrality rules.
I appreciate that. And in my opening, I failed to ask for unanimous consent to offer a 6th letter into the record, the smear campaign against FCC nominee Gigi Sohn, written by Preston Padden, who's the former president of ABC Television Network and a founding executive of Fox Broadcasting Title. So I'd ask unanimous consent to offer this into the record, and if there is no objection, it's allowed. With that, I will call on our next senator, Senator Vance.
All right, Senator Lujan, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Sohn, thank you for coming before us today. So I want to take my line of questioning a slightly different direction from some of the other folks, and I think just to be direct with you, Ms. Sohn, there are actually areas of substantive agreement between the two of us on some of these issues. But I also notice that you are a participant in what I would call this weird racialization of American political rhetoric in the last few years. And in particular, I think coming out of a desire to give equal opportunity and fairness to every American, regardless of skin color, that's of course a very good thing. There's been this weird trend in certain corners of American politics to be very, very racialized and even to criticize explicit racial groups almost as a pejorative. And you unfortunately have participated in that. And I want to ask just a couple of questions on that. Before I do, I want to illustrate this by pointing out something that's going on in my state. We have a very, very bad train crash in East Palestine, Ohio. It's caused a terrible chemical spill, likely environmental consequences as far as the eye can see. And of course, we're doing as much as we can to help constituents on the ground. But I note that Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg yesterday, when he made some public remarks, instead of commenting on this or talking about the issue or giving any reason to think that he's focused on one of the major transportation mishaps in this country over the last couple of years, he decided to instead focus on the terrible scourge of too many white men in the construction industry. And I find that preposterous, both on its own face, but also as a focus from the Secretary of Transportation.
What
so I want to read you a tweet
at his job have to do with this?
That backdrop
Pete
in
Buttigieg
mind.
is terrible as a transportation secretary. What does
And
that
I
have
quote,
to do with this?
President Obama is a raggedy black supremacist president, and his cowardly enablers would rather kill everybody than stop killing white
This has
people.
nothing to do
you
with
think a person
anything.
who said that should be appointed or confirmed to the FCC?
Could you read, I didn't quite get that. Could you just reread that, would you mind?
President Obama is a raggedy black supremacist president, and his cowardly enablers would rather kill everybody than stop killing white people. Do you think a person, yes or no, who says that should be appointed to the FCC?
I would need to know more of the context, honestly.
Okay, well, I think
can't really
clearly a
answer the question.
person who said that should not be appointed to the FCC.
Okay.
And in fact, you retweeted the
This is so
exact
stupid.
same thing, only with
So
President Trump
stupid.
instead of President Obama, and the
So
races reversed.
stupid.
Let me read another tweet, and let me ask you if this is an acceptable thing for an FCC
This
commissioner.
is just high sugar fluff bullshit. This is so
Angry
embarrassing.
black woman, not
This
a good
is
look,
so
Judge
embarrassing.
Brown Jackson. Would a person who tweeted that pejoratively be
This is and this is why we don't
deserving
have
of the
staffed
position that you're
FCC
seeking?
because of bullshit like this.
I think it has nothing to do with the position that they're seeking, so not necessarily.
So I think that's
I know I
Ms. Sohn,
tweeted something about
come on.
Judge Kavanaugh, right?
I think that's preposterous.
This is
Come on.
unbelievable. The fact
You
that this
tweeted
is
at Judge
going on
Kavanaugh,
in
angry
the
white
government
man, not a good
is
look,
so
Judge Kavanaugh. Now,
embarrassing.
here's why I think that it's relevant.
God.
We live in a country that's very diverse. People come from very different backgrounds. And one of the things that preserves what little racial comedy and harmony we have in this country is that our leaders don't use that racial comedy and harmony like a toddler who discovered their daddy's gun. You talk about racial issues in a way that will inflame the very worst things in our country. And I fear that if you're given this position of authority, you will use that authority to continue to inflame and to continue potentially even to censor based on some of these ideas. Now, I've just illustrated a couple of ways that we talk about these issues, or some of our leaders talk about these issues. I hope that I never do. And if I do, I hope my constituents will hold me to account for it. But
amazing.
One of the things that I fear here is that you're being appointed to a position with an incredible amount of control over the way that we communicate with each other, the way that we debate with each other, the way that our politics actually manifests itself in the public debate. And I guess I'd ask you, do you think those comments are a good thing for the American people to hear, given how much power you will have if you get confirmed?
Senator, I made those comments in my role as either a private citizen or a public advocate, and they will have absolutely no bearing on how I would act as an FCC commissioner.
Ms. Sohn, I appreciate that, but they reveal something about how you see the world, how you think about the world.
They're suggesting anyone who has remotely progressive views should not be able to hold a position like this. That's literally what they're doing right
A
now.
lot of power. If
Anyone who criticizes people in government should not be able to be in the FCC, even if they do it as a private citizen. So free speech warriors, huh?
Senator, if I could just say,
Joke.
I can't just walk into the FCC and say, okay, Gigi Sohn wants all these things to happen and they will happen. Okay, first of all, I'm not going to be the chair, and let's put that one on the table and put that to bed, because that's the latest K Street rumor, right? That the White House wants to make me the chair. That's false. Okay, you have to, as an FCC commissioner, you have to follow the law. You have to follow the Administrative Procedure Act. There's a procedure before you. You have to follow the record. You have to meet with stakeholders. You can't just willy-nilly make a decision based on what your predilections are. And if I were to do that, well, first of all, I'd have to get 2 other votes, unlikely. But if that were to happen, a court could reverse it, because you have to follow process. And I think it's really important for people who think that I'm some sort of Svengali who could just walk into the FCC and make it bend to my will, that I can't do that under the law.
Ms. Sohn, look, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that we have a constitution and we have certain procedures we have to follow. Of course, I'm one of 100 senators, and I can't walk into this body and make things exactly as I want them. The point is not that you don't have complete power over the FCC. The point is that we live in a country that is undergoing a series of very toxic movements in the way that we talk about one another. And I think in particular, the racial dialogue, the racial rhetoric that you've used is disqualifying. Whether you have a lot of power or a little power, I don't think it's what we need in our public administrators. I yield the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Next, we'll hear from Senator Rosen. Senator Rosen.
Well, thank you, Senator Lujan. Appreciate
Everything you brought up has
recognizing
absolutely
me,
nothing
and I
to do
really
with
appreciate
being an
today's
FCC
hearing.
commissioner. Unbelievable.
But before I begin my questions, I'd like to echo concerns raised about the nominees' positions on matters of importance for law enforcement, both nationally and in Nevada. Law enforcement groups have expressed serious concerns about Ms. Sohn's membership on the board of a digital privacy organization that has strongly advocated against law enforcement access to digital evidence needed to hold criminals accountable and to protect the public. Also of concern to law enforcement are allegations.
She's referring to facial recognition software that that is completely faulty. It has never helped in catching a bad guy, quote unquote, and it has been used by police to solicit nudes from people and to find information on ex partners. That's what she's referring to, by the way. She's referring to technology that they don't need and that they're just abusing. And technology that is incredibly faulty, and especially is faulty when it comes to Black and brown people.
In our rural frontier communities, and Nevada's goal of bringing affordable, reliable broadband across the state by 2029 is essential. Absolutely
right.
Essential to supporting our
That's
state's
absolutely
needs.
right.
As we saw during the pandemic, broadband is critical when connecting to school, to work, healthcare, to our friends, to our family. And now more than ever, we must make sure that Americans have access to reliable and affordable broadband. That's why I'm proud to have led many efforts on this subject, like my Middle Mile Broadband Deployment Act, which was included in the bipartisan infrastructure law and will help our communities get better connected. So, Ms. Sohn, as you know, mountains, deserts, valleys, we have it all. We have challenging terrain in Nevada, and it often separates rural and tribal areas from other communities with more broadband access. So if confirmed, how will you address these challenges to close the digital divide by bringing high quality and affordable broadband to all Americans, no matter where they live, even in these remote rural communities?
Thank you, Senator Rosen, and I hope you will give me an opportunity to address the law enforcement issue, because I think it's critically important, and I think my positions have been grossly misstated, and my position on the EFF board also grossly misstated. So I hope you'll give me that opportunity with a meeting or at this hearing to talk about that, because it's really important that we get the record straight. But let me address your main question, because as you may know, I've had several conversations with Brian Mitchell, who is the head of the Broadband office in Nevada, and we've talked at length about the concerns that Brian has in particular and the state has with the maps. And as I said before, and I've seen your letter with Senator Cortez Masto expressing concern about the maps. And I'd really would love the opportunity to be at the FCC to try to make that map as good as possible before NTIA has to allocate its money on June 30th. So to me, there's nothing more important right now than getting that money spent wisely and getting those maps right.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate that. I'm just going to really quickly, I just have a minute left, and I know we're in the middle of a vote, but I just want to talk about connecting small businesses, because 99% of businesses in Nevada are small businesses. We're on the forefront of emerging technologies, electric vehicles, blockchain, autonomous vehicles, lithium batteries. We're just doing it all. And as these enterprises continue to make significant investments in my state, we need to be sure that small businesses have the support of these innovative companies, the suppliers, contractors, the vendors, all the way that they have the digital tools and the broadband access they need. And so I know I just have a few seconds left. So I just want to say, how you said you're speaking with Nevada and others, how should the FCC work with federal agencies, including our Economic Development Agency and our Small Business Administration, to be sure that small businesses like those up and down my state are participating in internet-connected economy and have good access?
Yes, I think it's critical that the FCC work with any and all agency, coordinate with those agencies, whether it be the Department of Agriculture, the Small Business Administration, the Department of Commerce. Those relationships are critically important to make sure that everybody gets connected. And to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts. I think that's also very important. There's concern, frankly, from a lot of Republicans and conservatives, Senator Thune has left, about the fact that there are so many different agencies that have some sort of stake in broadband that we may be duplicating efforts. And I think it's incumbent on the leadership of those agencies to get together quite often to make sure that that's not happening.
Well, thank you. I look forward to seeing streamlining in so many of our agencies to get the job done for our constituents. I see my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Sohn, thank you for your time yesterday, and thank you for being with us again. A couple of things I want to discuss that I didn't get to yesterday. In your past careers, you've made it your job to go after certain companies in the telecom industry, and you've particularly been harsh with internet service providers. And in 2019, you tweeted, and I'm quoting the tweet, "Big tech companies are under enormous scrutiny while big telecom and cable and deregulated and consolidated. What's missing is the enormous amount of money big telecom and cable are spending to ensure that the focus stays on tech and not them." Even in your testimony that you submitted to us, you suggest that regulated entities are the ones making false and misleading attacks, and I'm quoting you there, on your record because they fear you. Your choice of terms. So how can we believe you will be impartial if an issue involving any of these companies comes before you as a commissioner?
Yeah, first I would say that every single industry player who I've criticized, I've also worked with. And not long before I got nominated, I worked closely with Verizon and Comcast and AT&T to get the emergency broadband benefit to get a letter together to support the emergency broadband benefit. So I've worked with these companies. And as I said to Senator Vance, a proceeding at the FCC is constrained. You have to follow the record, decide based on the record, using the procedures outlined in the Administrative Procedure
Okay,
Act.
then,
And
yes, let me ask you about
Sure.
that and where you're going with that response. And I saw your response to Senator Vance. So if you're leaning into this component that your background, as you say in your testimony, your background as an advocate, your choice of words there, and you suggest that that is what makes you a good commissioner. That is going to help make you a good commissioner. If being an advocate is what positions you to do this job, then why should we think you would act differently in this job when you were a commissioner?
Well, because as a policy, I know that the role of a policymaker is different than the role of an advocate. And just let me also say, I really only asked to be treated like other nominees for the FCC. We've had nominees for the FCC, including my former boss, who worked for two industries, and he was a very, very fervent advocate for his industries. Chairman Pai worked for Verizon, and I'm sure he was a very fervent advocate for Verizon. So I'm just asking to be treated the same way, Senator.
Okay, let's look at it a different way. You were named a top lobbyist by The Hill in 2012 and 2013. So do you consider yourself a lobbyist, or do you consider yourself an advocate?
She's a
I haven't been
lawyer.
registered as a lobbyist for years, and that just, in fact, I was registered as a lobbyist very briefly, but because when I ran public knowledge, I stopped going to The Hill, so it didn't make any sense. And that Hill lobbyist, best lobbyist, doesn't mean that you are registered as a lobbyist. It just means you're a good advocate. So I was very proud of that distinction.
All right. I checked on the number of filings that you signed your name to at the FCC, and filings and proceedings, it was nearly 150 that you had signed your name to. You said you will voluntarily recuse yourself from some broadcast issues if confirmed. However, you also participated in proceedings on many other topics ranging from net neutrality to universal service and intercarrier compensation. Once again, as we look at this, whether the work is as an advocate or a lobbyist or a term you've discounted, activist, should you be recusing yourself from all of this variety of issues that are going to come about, issues you've previously signed your name to filings and proceedings?
Ridiculous request.
Would you be recusing yourself from all of those?
That
Well,
makes
Senator,
no
I addressed
sense what
this
she is saying.
quite at length in the February 9th hearing, and I'll just repeat myself. My voluntary recusal was an attempt to address the concerns, and we heard them again today, that people had over my participation on the Sports Fan Coalition New York board, which ran Lowcast.
Yeah.
So I voluntarily recused myself at the nexus of the work I had done previously at the FCC, not at the FCC, as an advocate working at the FCC, and the Lowcast board. Okay, so that's why I voluntarily recused, to address those specific concerns. What you're asking for is not tethered to anything other than just every single issue out there. And again, I just want to be treated, I just want to be treated the same.
I would disagree with that. These are tethered to statements you've agreed with and filings that you have signed your name to. So it is relevant. I see my time is over, but this does have an impact. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
That is the most ridiculous. So what about the anti-net neutrality members of the FCC? Should they not be able to vote on net neutrality?
In front of the Commerce
Every
Committee.
FCC
Your
appointee
perseverance
views
is
on net
admirable,
neutrality are known.
And
It was the most
particularly in light of the
ridiculous.
attacks that have been made against your character. It was clear after your first hearing that you're qualified to serve as a commissioner of the FCC. It was also clear after your second hearing that you are well qualified to serve as a commissioner of the FCC. And I am every bit as confident that it will be as clear by the end of the day today at your third hearing that you're qualified and ready to serve for the FCC. People across my state look forward to your confirmation and to the FCC having a full complement of commissioners to tackle truly important issues, including rural broadband deployment, support for local news and television, and advancing digital equity. Last time you appeared before this committee, I noted the historic nature of your nomination and how important it was for the country to see LGBTQ people, whether they are senators or soon-to-be FCC commissioners, in prominent roles while being their true selves. Like I said then, being first is not always easy, but millions of people across the country, including myself, are grateful for you continuing to pave the way for LGBTQ people who want to serve their country.
Thank you.
I want to turn to a couple of questions here on specific matters. I was honored to lead the bipartisan National Suicide Hotline Designation Act, which transitioned the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline into an easy-to-remember 3-digit code, 988, to better serve people in crisis situations. I was disturbed to learn recently that there was a nearly day-long outage of the 988 hotline back in December, and that it was a result of a cyber attack. While FCC has since proposed regulations to bring 988 outage reporting requirements in line with 911 outage reporting requirements, I'm concerned that the 988 lifeline remains vulnerable to cyber attacks, or which would prevent people in crisis from getting the help they need. What more can the FCC or Congress do to improve the resiliency of 988 and 911 services?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I've always thought that the FCC should play a larger role in ensuring that our networks are secure and resilient. The chairwoman has done some good work with regard to mobile networks, but I think we need to do more, and I think the FCC needs to have a more active role, and if Congress would like to give it a more active role, that would be great, to oversee the cybersecurity practices of ISPs.
Okay. I believe that there's tremendous value in consumers having access to relevant local news and programming. In a world in which we can increasingly seek out our sources that simply tell us what we want to hear, local media can provide timely, trustworthy information that helps Wisconsinites and others connect with their communities and neighbors. That's why Senator Markey and I last week reintroduced the Protecting Community Television Act to support funding for public education and government, or PEG, channels. Thousands of Wisconsinites rely on these channels to get news and other programming rooted in their own communities, and in-kind contributions play an important role in those services. Ms. Sohn, from your experience as a consumer advocate, do you agree that local media is important, including for improving our national discourse? And if confirmed to the Commission, what could the FCC do to better support these PEG channels?
Yes, that's a great question. Look, I believe that local media, whether it be broadcasting or PEG channels, are really sort of the bulwark against some of the partisanship that we've been talking about today. And I'll even admit that some of my tweets have been sharp, and I've admitted it before, this country has changed a lot since 2016, let's just face it. I did not like the FCC's decision to include in-kind contributions as part of the 5% of the cable fee. And I would support if the chairwoman were to start a proceeding to reverse that. If the records show that that was a thing to do, my inclination would be to reverse that decision, because I think it's important. It's amazing how many people watch PEG. You don't think it, right? You see it, and you see these basic, these very basic channels with basic entertainment, but people watch it. So it's critically important because people do want to know what's going on in their community. And I think the FCC is tasked by law to promote that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Budd.
I thank the chair. Ms. Sohn, welcome back to the committee. Good to see you. Enjoyed our conversation last week. So my constituents in North Carolina, they support law enforcement and they want safer communities. Many live, work, and raise their families in those rural communities. Bridging the digital divide and getting access to every American has long been a bipartisan interest and an important job for the FCC. In written congressional testimony, you claim that, quote, policymakers have focused disproportionately on broadband deployment in rural areas, end quote. Residents of North Carolina know that improving internet access in rural areas keeps these smaller communities thriving. We need an FCC that's focused on bridging the digital divide in North Carolina and prioritizing the economic and educational benefits of better broadband. It's also concerning that law enforcement groups like the National Sheriff's Association and the Fraternal Order of Police oppose your nomination. You're listed as a board member of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, and since your nomination, you've tried to minimize the significance of your board seat, but being a board member is no small thing. EFF has called you a close collaborator for nearly 20 years. You've donated to them and made public calls for others to donate to EFF. In a letter to this committee, the Fraternal Order of Police stated that you have an anti-police bias and refused to disavow many extreme positions from EFF. In the summer of 2020, as rioters burned businesses across the country, EFF encouraged folks to go to the streets, even publishing a memo on how to thwart law enforcement investigations, suggesting people buy a prepaid disposable phone and dress for anonymity. Now, Chair, I'd like to submit this to the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Now, the FCC and law enforcement, they work together a lot, as we know. And as you know, the FCC makes sure that law enforcement alerts are delivered over communications networks and that those...
So if you criticize the police, if you criticize politicians, if you support organizations who understand digital rights issues, you should not be allowed to serve on the FCC. You should not be allowed to serve on the FCC if you actually understand the issues you're going to be voting on. And if you have any remotely progressive views. That's what this guy's saying. That's what Ted Cruz has been saying. That's honestly, that's the American government for you, really. I mean, at the end of the day, let's call it what it is.
Statement referring to federal law enforcement officers responding to riots in 2020 as, quote, armed goons in riot gear with tear gas, end quote, as Senator Cruz mentioned in his opening remarks. Ms. Sohn, given your demonstrated...
The EFF does amazing work, and they're, you know, one of the top digital rights organizations out there.
Best interest, especially if you help lead an agency that's a critical partner of law enforcement? Yes or no? And just simply yes or no, please.
Could you repeat the question because I kind of lost?
Yeah, the question's really based on your understanding of why law enforcement's concerned. I mean, do you understand why law enforcement has concern, yes or no?
No, I don't, actually.
You actually don't. Okay, so that's
No,
actually
I'm very
telling you.
surprised.
Thank you. I do want to reclaim my time here. So, I mean, it's obvious why they would be concerned with these tweets and retweets and the things that you would support. But Ms. Sohn, the EFF published a guide called Attending a Protest that tells people to wear a mask. It will protect you from being identified in photos of the protest. Ms. Sohn, does encouraging folks to hide their identity during violent situations make law enforcement's job easier? Yes or no, simply?
I don't consider protests necessarily violent, sir. Look, I don't make policy.
Well, during violent situations, as we saw in 2020, do you understand why law enforcement would have a concern?
What does this have to do with her appointment to the FCC?
Yes or no?
I understand why people might not want to be surveilled. I understand that. but I had nothing to do with.
So I was hoping for a yes or no that you could actually understand law
You're not asking her a
enforcement's
yes or no question.
concern.
This is a
Understand,
baiting,
absolutely
bullshit,
Do
gaslighting
understand
question.
law enforcement's concern. Thank you.
do, yes.
Ms. Sohn,
Oh
we can learn a lot by who a person associates with, and you've been associated with a lot of radical partisans. You're an EFF board member and have received support from a group, 18
People who
million
read
Rising, which
policies
has
and
said,
understand
quote,
them. Those
policing
radical.
has never been
You
an
read
effective
shit. You're a
response to
radical.
violence because police are agents of white supremacy, end quote. The FCC needs
They are.
impartial leadership, and unfortunately, I don't believe that you offer that. I fear that your confirmation would make it harder for law enforcement to protect North Carolinians and make it harder for my state's many rural communities to get desperately needed broadband. I urge all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to oppose your nomination. And again, thank you for being here. I yield back.
Can I
Yes,
respond?
go ahead,
Yeah.
quickly, yes.
Just a couple of things. First of all, my tweets and retweets are about as banal and basic as you can imagine. Police brutality is bad. Militarization of police. Again, this is not me speaking, it's just likes and retweets. That Alexandria Ocasio tweet or retweet that I did was because she was explaining what she meant by defund the police. I actually personally feel that the defund the police term is stupid and it's been counterproductive. That's the only reason I retweeted that. I do not support defunding the police.
Madam Chair, I just want to be clear. I did yield back my time. Thank you.
I thank the senator. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Let me just say first that I've always respected and worked with law enforcement ever since I was in law school. In fact, I just did a walkthrough in my neighborhood 2 weeks ago with the police. So I'm really baffled by this opposition. It's the Fraternal Order of Police's biggest concern is EFF's encryption position, which, by the way, the FCC has no jurisdiction over, and I've not spoken about it. I mean, it's similar with the FOSTA SESTA. I've not spoken about these things. These are not, I care about FCC stuff, and this is not FCC stuff. So
Senator Welch.
I think it's a bit overwrought, to be honest with you.
Senator Welch.
That's being
Thank you,
gentle. That's being
Madam
very
Chair.
diplomatic.
I have two real concerns. One is that we get rural broadband broadly and effectively deployed. Number two, that we have an effective functioning FCC. And that requires, number one, that we do have some bipartisanship on this committee. Every one of us represents rural areas. My Republican colleagues in many cases have more rural areas than we do. Mapping is critical to that. And our understanding in Vermont is that the mapping is overstating the coverage. That's been the case for some time. We have been asking that there not be a distribution of money until we have confidence that the mapping is solid. What say you about the mapping and what you'll do to make certain that before we act on the deployment, we have accurate maps to guarantee that folks in rural areas, the last barn on the dirt road in Vermont, has access to high-speed internet?
So, Senator, two things. You probably know that I recently spoke with Christine Hallquist, who's the head of the Broadband office in Vermont, and my wife and I have a very close relationship, having had our civil union there. So we love the state. And yes, I agree with you 100%. It is critical to get those maps as accurate as possible by June 30th. And I would dedicate myself to doing it if I could get confirmed.
Well, and if we don't have accurate maps, we've got to wait until we do get them.
Yes, so.
And there's a tension between getting the money out the door and getting it out the door in a way that is going to be effectively utilized, right?
Without a doubt. There's a huge tension, and I understand why the Commerce Department wants to get that, wants to get the money out. I don't think they're going to change, so that's why I think it's important to get somebody in there now who's going to work their tail off to try to get those maps as accurate as possible.
All right,
But let me
go on to another question. You know, Senator Thune brought up, I think, a very fair concern, and that is, will the commission work with the Congress to do things where there's a bipartisan path forward? And my understanding of the distinction between what you said and what he was concerned about is a leak versus you were authorized. So I'm going to take you that is what you were doing, something you thought was fully authorized. But in the spirit of what Senator Thune was asking, can you pledge as a commissioner that you will do your level best to work with Congress in an effort to get to the bipartisan approach that we need in order to get rural broadband in all of our communities?
Absolutely, and I did play, as a public advocate, I played a very large role in working both with Republicans and Democrats to get that bill passed.
All right, and the third is a point I want to make. Madam Chair, there's a real dilemma for rural America, and the dilemma is that the big cable companies and the big telecom companies have a business model that is very much oriented towards making money, which is easier to do in the dense urban populations, and they're leaving us in the rural areas behind. And that's true whether you're Senator Schmidt with Missouri or you're in rural Northeast Kingdom, Vermont. And we have in Vermont community union districts, and those have been empowered with local authority to make decisions where they're on the hook to make certain that that farmer at the end of the dirt road has high-speed internet. That's the objective, not maximizing the profit. Is that a model that you see as being helpful to guarantee that rural folks with not much economic clout are going to get what they absolutely need?
Yeah, I love that model, and in fact, the infrastructure law requires the states to confer with local communities. And if they're not doing that, that's something that NTIA needs to look and make sure that is happening, okay? So the local communities are on the front lines of knowing who has broadband, what they need, what the community needs, so they must work with the state level folks who are giving out the money.
Well, I'm having more confidence in Vermont that if we do this right, the money actually is going to make a difference for those folks in rural America. And I don't think we did the job that we needed to do in the past round of funding. So I wish you luck. Thank you for being here, and I yield back.
You have great leadership in Vermont, so I agree with you. I think you will get good broadband there.
Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, and welcome back, I suppose. My first time with you, but I did want to touch on a couple of issues maybe that have not been addressed yet. The FCC, as you know, has an important role in the lives of Americans. It is an independent agency, of course, with the stated mission of overseeing and improving our communication system. But beyond those stated goals, the FCC also plays an important role in safeguarding some of our most important and fundamental rights. The FCC ensures that our nation maintains the principles of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. The First Amendment, I really believe, is our pressure release valve as a country to speak your mind. And the FCC is crucial in ensuring Americans can express themselves, agree, disagree, and ensure dissent is protected. In carrying out the agency's duties, the FCC ensures that we're able to connect with friends and family, but also exercise our fundamental rights of freedom of speech and hear differing viewpoints. An FCC commissioner must commit himself or herself to these noble goals. And commissioners should work with Congress to protect Missourians and every American's right to freedom of speech. Our republic simply cannot endure if we decide that only certain individuals or certain viewpoints can be heard, silenced, or censored. Yet in direct contrast to these principles and freedoms of this country was founded upon, some of the largest companies in the history of the world, these big tech monopolies, have worked recently to silence or censor viewpoints, specifically conservative ones. The examples since you last testified in front of this committee are numerous. For example, Google censored Republican fundraising efforts in email platforms. Google on YouTube removed videos created by the Conservative Political Action Conference. Google altered search engine results related to an interview on the Joe Rogan podcast. In my previous job as AG, we filed a landmark lawsuit that exposed a lot of this, that's been amplified by the Twitter files and then subject of a lot of the hearings that are happening over in the House. What deeply concerns me is that you've spent the last 2 decades of your life pushing an agenda on behalf of these same big tech companies. The ties between you and these big tech companies are clear, numerous, and quite frankly, disturbing. Public Knowledge, the nonprofit that you founded in 2001 and served as its president, received $100,000 from Google, over $50,000 from Amazon, over $50,000 from Facebook, as well as hundreds of thousands of dollars from third-party groups connected to these big tech companies. According to public disclosures, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a foundation where you served as a board member, was one of the groups that received, and I quote, the most substantial contributions from Google's U.S. government affairs and public policy team. Your ties to Google were so tight that already back in 2007, Politico noted that you worked closely with Google on several policy issues. According to MANA, a national Latina organization, as a senior advisor to the FCC several years ago, you championed a proposal to let Google and other tech monopolies pillage minority programmers' television's content without paying for it. In 2020, you criticized my colleague, Senator Cornyn, and continue to push the big tech agenda by defending Section 230 liability protections for those companies. So my first question simply is, do you honestly expect the members of this committee or the American public to believe that you can be neutral with this long history and conflict of interest?
The stuff
Absolutely.
That this guy...
And let me say first, Senator, nice to meet you as well, that the FCC does not have jurisdiction over Google. If you have, I had to provide every single radio, television, and news article that I was quoted in for the last 10 years. You will see, particularly in the last 5 years, I have been as critical of big tech companies as you have. So my relationship with them back in the day when they were smaller, when they promoted policies that public knowledge agreed with, yes, we were on the same side. And talking about the money, we got money from everybody. I asked money from every company. We would get money from Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, DirecTV. So we were not partisan when it came to money.
Let me ask you, because you've mentioned that some of these claims are phony, and we'll get to.
Okay, so it's interesting that that person. We're at about the 2-hour mark, folks. So we're going to kind of wrap up here. That was painful. That was just, I mean, as we expected it to be. I mean, you know, but so what that person was suggesting, first of all, I found it interesting that they said, we're going to bring up some issues that no one brought up yet. And then they brought up the same issues that the people against her have been bringing up the entire time. Hold on, I had some notes here that just fell off my desk. What that person is doing is they're conflating net neutrality with the way some big tech companies behave. Net neutrality has to do with the flow of the internet. It has to do with the type of internet an internet service provider can give you and the way websites load and web traffic on the internet. It has nothing to do with how internet companies behave. So this guy is misrepresenting what net neutrality actually is, and he's just totally conflating issues in a got you attempt for Gigi Sohn, which is the same thing that's been happening very often throughout this hearing. So let's start with the Ted Cruz thing, because some of you guys were saying, well, what exactly is Ted Cruz getting at here? Okay, so what Ted Cruz was harping on was he was harping on a trial that she was part of in her job as a lawyer. She is an attorney. She has been working in the public space for over 30 years. And this particular trial, there was a settlement. There was no quote unquote sweet deal. That was absolutely ridiculous. She was trying to honor her confidentiality. She didn't bring it up because it wasn't applicable. It's not applicable to what she would do as an FCC member. So he's trying to make it out like, oh, well, she didn't disclose that. And that's some huge deal. Like, no, it's just a settlement that she had at her job. She's worked in this space. So it just wasn't, to say he's making a mountain out of a molehill would be a total misrepresentation, because that would imply this is even a molehill in the first place. It's not even a molehill. Basically, he's making up a molehill and then he's making a mountain out of it. That's what Ted Cruz did. The other thing he brought up about her contributions that she made. Gee, Ted, maybe the fact she's made more contributions, again, as a private citizen, maybe she's made more contributions than other people because her process has taken 2 years and counting. And usually for most appointees, it takes a couple weeks. Took a couple weeks for Ajit Pai. Took a couple weeks for Symington. What's that guy's first, whatever his first name is. He's completely unqualified, by the way. She has more qualifications than both of them combined. She's still waiting. So as a private citizen, she wants to contribute to campaigns of politicians she wants to win. So what? What is she supposed to do? Just not be a citizen for 2 years? So that's the other thing. Oh, and Ted Cruz, you saw that she caught him in the gotcha. He brought up the amount that she contributed throughout her lifetime. So, this was just a baiting, and it was just a bait attempt by Ted Cruz. It was just an attempt to try to get some sound bites. The questions that they asked were horribly framed questions. They were gaslighting 101. And she was just subjected to that for about 80% of this ridiculous hearing. What does her personal views on police have to do? And by the way, just for the record, I just agree with Gigi Sohn on some issues. She doesn't support defunding the police. That's what she said. I do. I disagree with her there. I disagree with her view on Edward Snowden. I strongly disagree with it, actually. I disagree with her support for the Democratic Party and her enthusiasm for the Democratic Party. There's probably some politicians that she's a fan of that I'm not. Why do I still support Gigi anyway? Well, because all that has nothing to do with how she would be as an FCC commissioner. That's why. And most of the stuff that was brought up in this hearing by the people who oppose her nomination has nothing to do. I mean, at one point, that one guy was talking about Pete Buttigieg being a horrible Secretary of Transportation. I agree. And what's going on in East Palestine right now is absolutely freaking criminal and beyond concerning. And by the way, these chemical plumes are heading into all kinds of areas. They're heading into a major city. It's heading into Pittsburgh. Of course that's terrible. That has nothing to do with her as an FCC commissioner. I mean, I was waiting for someone to be like, we heard you like pancakes, and we're concerned with how that might impact your ability to be an FCC commissioner. What the hell? For a lot of this hearing, and I expected nothing less, the response should have been, what the hell? This has nothing to do with anything. Pretty much everything Ted Cruz brought up. It was just her doing her job and her being a citizen. And they're literally saying, if you have views that are remotely progressive, you shouldn't be able to serve on the FCC. The one person was Marsha Blackburn was trying to make it out like, oh, you have views on net neutrality. So should you recuse yourself from a vote on net neutrality? The FCC's job is to rule on things like net neutrality. That's their job. Every FCC commissioner's view on net neutrality is publicly known. Right now, there are 2 pro-net neutrality people in the FCC. There are 2 anti-net neutrality people in the FCC. She would be the tiebreaker. And she's a pro-net neutrality pick because that's what Biden promised. And at the end of the day, folks, that's what they don't want. They don't want a fully staffed. It's still early for me, folks. They don't want a fully staffed FCC. That's what they don't want. That's why they're making up this nonsense. They're bringing these points that have nothing to do with her ability to do her job. They're bringing up stuff that she retweeted. They're trying to, they badmouth Fight for the Future, the organization that I collaborate with. They badmouth EFF. What do these organizations do? They actually read digital rights policies, and they act in the consumer interest. Well said, you don't like my music. If she said she liked pancakes, they would slam her for being anti-waffle. Yeah, Ted Cruz would be, why didn't you disclose your pancake breakfast? How can we trust you if you don't disclose you eating pancakes this morning when we specifically asked you whether or not you like pancakes and you kind of said, what the hell? Well, why didn't you do that? Despos Fleisch, what's up? Thanks for being here from Germany. Will you be my Valentine, Gigi? I hope she has. I hope her and her wife have a wonderful Valentine's Day planned, because this is absolutely ridiculous what she has been put through for a third frickin' time. A third frickin' time. And Michael Cooper, who is Gigi Sohn? I'm not familiar with this. She is Biden's appointee, or nominee, rather, to the FCC. And this confirmation has taken 2 years and counting. They've been dragging their feet on it because she's pro-net neutrality, and they don't want a pro-net neutrality FCC. So they've been bringing up all these right-wing smears about stuff she retweeted and boards she sits on, and they're trying to make a case that she can't be an FCC commissioner, even though she has no more partisan views than anyone else on the FCC. Ajit Pai had far right-wing views. He was a lobbyist. Why did it only take weeks to confirm him? There's tons of cable lobbyists that have been part of the FCC, including Tom Wheeler. She mentioned it. She's like, he was a lobbyist. He got confirmed with no problem. He was a big cable lobbyist. You think that's not partisan? Why was it no problem for him? So they're trying to make this about her personal views, which, by the way, she's not like some radical lefty. She's a lawyer. She seems to be mostly Democrat-centric. She doesn't support Edward Snowden. She doesn't support defund the police, at least according to what she said in this hearing. She's not some crazy radical, or quote unquote, by their standards, crazy radical. I mean, I wouldn't consider, you know what I mean by that. Because, by the way, I mean, I support, I'm completely, at the end of the day, they just don't want the FCC to have a 3-2 commission. Robbie's right. They just don't. This was so frustrating. We knew it was going to be. This is why she's had 3 of them. Because they just grandstand about this nonsense that has nothing to do with anything. It's just high sugar fluff. It's just high sugar divisive fluff that they're just trying to get her out of this position because they don't want a fully functioning FCC. Why? Because that fully functioning FCC would reinstate net neutrality. It would work on the digital divide. It would do all kinds of things that big tech lobbyists don't want to see happen. And by the way, when that person was trying to make the argument that she was helping the big tech companies, quote unquote, that's nonsense. That is nonsense. Again, net neutrality has nothing to do with the way internet companies behave. It has everything to do with the way ISPs behave and the way they can't discriminate against the flow of internet content. So it has nothing to do. If you're concerned about the way social media platforms are behaving and what have you, you want to support antitrust. You want to support antitrust. The only way the FCC plays a role in that, again, like the FCC has to do with the way the communication vehicles work, be it TV, radio, or internet. They don't make editorial decisions when it comes to what's on the internet. That's a separate issue. That's a separate issue. Now, they would have some things around laws like Section 230 and stuff like that. But again, Section 230 is basically what allows free speech on the internet. Blowing a hole in it would have huge unintended consequences. So you don't want to mess with Section 230. You want to just leave it as is and build policy upon it that meets the moment. And a lot of the stuff that they brought up today that they tried to use as gotcha attempts on Gigi Sohn, that has nothing to do with what an FCC commissioner would do. And thank you for this, Robbie. Hit that like, folks. She said she didn't like the wording of defund the police, and she said she didn't support defund the police. Now, maybe she just meant the phrase itself. Maybe she meant the actual concept. I'm not sure. But she said that she retweeted that because AOC described what is meant by defund the police. She said that she thought the phrase was not good, and then she said she doesn't support it. So maybe she just meant the phrase. Maybe she meant the actual concept. Again, or the actual policy. Again, it's not, I hear what you're saying. But again, it's just not relevant. Like if she does or doesn't support defund the police, that's her business. Okay. And whether she does or doesn't, even though I do support defund the police, if she does, cool. If she doesn't, it has nothing to do with the type of FCC commissioner she'd be. And as far as being an FCC commissioner, she'd be a good one. That's all I care about. That's all I care about. All I care about is how she's going to vote, you know, as an FCC commissioner in her job. So yeah, I hear you. I guess it's like not totally clear whether or not she's 100% for or she's not for it. But, you know, it's just not. I mean, all these gotcha things, it's just not relevant. And this is American politics. This is American politics for you. It's just a bunch of people who are really just trying to serve corporate interests. So they bring up all these nonsensical things that are just complete and utter nonsense to try to distract from the actual thing that's going on here. Here at the end of the day is what this is all about. Net neutrality is favored by 83% of Americans. 83% of the American public support net neutrality, and we got it taken away from us anyway. And net neutrality is incredibly pro-user, pro-consumer, and it is anti the corporatocracy. Net neutrality, you know who abiding by net neutrality hurts? The big cable operatives. That's who. The Comcasts of the world, the AT&Ts in the world. By the way, all the people who own news networks. Bipartisan support for net neutrality. Look at this. So all respondents, 86%. 86%. Now Republicans oppose it more than Democrats. Yeah, and this is, by the way, this is who oppose the repeal of net neutrality. So we gotta make sure we're reading it the right way. So these are the people who supported net neutrality. Those high numbers are the people who supported the net neutrality. Even a lot of Republicans supported it. A lot of Republicans supported it. Most, like 80-some% of Republicans were against the repeal of net neutrality. Some were for it. Handful of Democrats were for it. But overall, over 80% of the American public supports net neutrality, and we're against opposing net neutrality laws. And we got it taken from us anyway. So, you know, again, this is the third hearing. This is the third hearing, and we're going to see how this ends. We're going to see if they move her to vote on this. If everybody does what they promise, she will get through, despite all the right-wing nonsense that Ted Cruz and his ilk brought up, which, by the way, I couldn't help notice there was a big disproportion of all the people speaking who were for her versus against her. It seemed like there was, like, for every person for her, there were like 3 or 4 people against her. Meanwhile, the vote's about 50-50 on her, so that was interesting, but not surprising, to say the least. Guys, please, if you haven't already, go to battleforthenet.com right now, today. Do it now. Go to battleforthenet.com and demand that they take action. This is from Fight for the Future, the organization I collaborate with that Ted Cruz isn't a fan of. And you know what? When Ted Cruz isn't a fan of what you're doing, you know you're doing something right. So battleforthenet.com, demand that they support Gigi Sohn and that they confirm her right away. We got to be loud, or they're just going to keep kicking this can down the road. This has been absolutely ridiculous. The fact that it's taken 3 hearings is absolutely absurd. And we just watched the nonsense that goes on in this hearing. This was embarrassing on so many levels. And I learned something about myself today, and it was something I already knew. I could never serve on the FCC. I could never be in office. When people say, Ron, why don't you run for office? This is why. Because, you know, I would have been screaming at the top of my freaking lungs throughout half of this freaking thing. If I was Gigi Sohn, I would have walked out of there. I would have walked out of there a while ago, and I'd be like, you know what? You guys are on your own. This is bullshit. You know, I really do. I applaud the discipline and diplomacy that she has. And that's why she's meant for a job like this, because she has that. I wouldn't be able to do that. And it takes all kinds, folks. I would not have been able to display the patience that she did. I would have walked out of there. I literally would have. Because, and this is why when people say, oh, Ron, why don't you respect our system? This is why. Respect is something to be earned, and our system doesn't deserve it. Because we have these corporate lackeys elected into office who will just grandstand about this high sugar fluff nonsense. And there's other people who don't even realize it's a smokescreen. And we're supposed to take this seriously? Wow. So we got to fight back. And please, battleforthenet.com. And thank you for hanging out with me. Despos Fleisch, thank you for the Super Chat contribution. I know this was an abnormally timed stream. I'll be back on Thursday with Tina Desiree Berg. In the meantime, you can subscribe to my channel over on youtube.com/Ron Placone if you're not subscribed yet. And you can catch me on the road April 14th, Los Angeles, California. May 12th, Los Angeles, California. June 16th, Madison, Wisconsin. June 17th, Minneapolis, Minnesota. June 29th, Chicago, Illinois. By the way, Madison, Minneapolis, and Chicago, get your tickets now and use the promo code Lucy at checkout for discounted tickets. I got an early bird special going, so use the promo code Lucy for discounted tickets. Oh, and by the way, another announcement. If you are on strike or if you are part of a union effort and I am coming to your town and you want to go to the show, you get to go to the show for free. Just email me, send me some information, and we'll figure it out. But if you are currently on strike or if you are part of a union effort and that is going on in the moment, you get to attend my show as my guest if you want to. So ronplacone.com. You can get a hold of me there. You can get tickets for any and all shows. I'll be back Thursday with Tina Desiree Berg. Thank you guys for being part of this. Thank you for tuning in today for the special stream. Shout out to Status Coup for letting us do this and for covering this issue. And I'll see you guys Thursday.